Chapter 506. Conrad, you can leave the hospital now. In the ward of Boston's Massachusetts General Hospital, a nurse spoke in a sharp voice to the big man who was packing up. This hospital was famous. There were only 3 famous hospitals in Boston. Of course, some small clinics or private hospitals were not included in this list. The 3 most famous ones were Massachusetts General Hospital, Dana-Farber Cancer Center, and Boston Children's Hospital. Among them, Massachusetts General Hospital was the second most comprehensive hospital in the United States. Dana-Farber Cancer Center was the 4th most specialized cancer hospital in the United States. Boston Children's Hospital was the top pediatric hospital in the United States. Of course, this ranking was there for all to see. The prices of the healers were also quite famous. "Oh, thank you." Hearing the nurse's words, the big man who was packing up said in a low voice, "Papaya." Looking at the guy's appearance, the nurse couldn't help but roll her eyes at him. Then, she swayed her big butt and left. The hospital was just like the entertainment industry. Sometimes, it was really hard to see the light, especially when it came to private life. Of course, this was not absolute. There were good people everywhere, but bad people still accounted for the majority. It was the same in the hospital. In the domestic medical system, private life was very messy. It was even more so in foreign hospitals. The United States was a very open country. Thinking about the contents of so many FBI warnings, which were all related to hospitals, it could be roughly understood. Although Massachusetts General Hospital was the second best hospital in the United States, the nurses here were obviously unwilling to be left out. Conrad was more than 2 meters tall and had a body full of muscles. He was treated with the best medicine and lived in the best room. Naturally, he was targeted by many female nurses. However, this guy seemed to be born without love for women. He didn't seem to understand the explicit hints of these women and kept playing dumb. At first, these female nurses were very patient, but later, their attitudes slowly changed. They either ignored him or acted like they did just now. However, these attitudes couldn't change his character. His character was like this. Conrad took his things and left the hospital. As soon as he walked to the door, he saw a police car parked there. "Get in the car." Looking at the police car in front of him, Conrad was a little hesitant. In the end, he went around it and prepared to leave, but the person sitting in the car didn't let him go. Instead, he took the initiative to open the door of the passenger seat and said to him. Hearing this person's words, Conrad couldn't help but glance at this guy. He hesitated for a while before getting into the car. "Where are you going?" "I'll give you a ride." Watching Conrad get in the car, the driver said with a smile. If Jiang Hai were here, he would definitely recognize this person. He had met this person before. This person was called Doyle George. When the Gray Gang in Boston attacked him, this guy had fought side by side with him. However, it was just as Jiang Hai thought. This guy was a gold-plated person, relying on the heroic battle he had fought in the past. He was then transferred back to Boston and became a sheriff. The United States was different from Huaxia. There was no division chief or section chief in the police department. The police ranks here were only divided into police officer, sergeant, superintendent, sheriff, superintendent, and other positions. Of course, each state had different laws, and naturally, the names were different, but the meaning was similar. The position of a sheriff was basically the same as the power of the director of some domestic police stations. If it was in a big city like Boston, it would be similar to the power of the director of a local police station. This also proved how strong Doyle George was. Of course, it referred to the strength of his family. As for him and Conrad, it was mainly because of the battle with Jiang Hai. In that battle, Conrad was shot many times. After a simple treatment by Bernice, he was sent to the hospital. Doyle George also went to the hospital and happened to know this guy. After knowing that he had betrayed Jiang Hai at the last moment, and that was why Conrad's men didn't become hostages, Doyle became interested in him. Gradually, he came to see Conrad. After the two met a few times, not only did they become friends, but they were also very close to each other. Of course, the money for Conrad's treatment was paid for by Jiang Hai. He didn't care about the tens of thousands of dollars, but Doyle George helped him get discharged from the hospital. He also knew about this guy's history. He used to be an underground boxer, which made him want to recruit him into his police force. This was also one of the reasons why he was here. Thank you. Hearing Doyle George's words, Conrad didn't say the specific location, but just said in a muffled voice, "You don't have to thank me. You don't have to thank me. It was Jiang Hai who paid you, but you still have to be careful in the future. You can't just trust anyone." Hearing his words, Doyle, who had been with him for a long time, naturally knew what he meant. He smiled and said, "Jiang Hai. Benefactor, please take me to Jiang Hai." Hearing his words, Conrad was stunned for a moment, then his gaze became more determined. He originally came to Boston to look for Jiang Hai, but due to a freak combination of factors, he became Jiang Hai's enemy and entered the Grey Gang, almost killing Jiang Hai. And Jiang Hai actually paid for his treatment. In his opinion, he owed Jiang Hai 2 lives. Okay. Upon hearing his words, Doyle couldn't help but chuckle helplessly. However, he knew that this was Conson's habit, so he didn't say much. Instead, he turned the steering wheel and drove towards Winthrop's position. As for Jiang Hai's home in Winthrop, the atmosphere was a bit solemn. Of course, the main solemn ones were Jiang Hai and Bernice, the other 3 were just implicated. "I found that you've been getting more and more out of control recently. Are you infected with some rich boy's habits? Can't you just stay at home for a few days? You've only been out for half a month, and you've only been back for 3 days, and now you're leaving again?" Looking at Jiang Hai, who was eating steak, Bernice put down the knife and fork in her hand and said with a frown, This time I'm really going to discuss business. I'll be back in 3 days at most, at least 2 days." Hearing Bernice's words, Jiang Hai also smiled. In fact, to be honest, if it weren't for the billion, he would be too lazy to go. People who were familiar with Jiang Hai knew that this person was actually very lazy. He liked the kind of monotonous life. He had no interest in the pursuit of excitement, the pursuit of individuality, the search for the warmest place in his heart, and the like. He was not a rich young man, nor was he an artistic young man. His artistic style was not that heavy. Jiang Hai could be summarized as greedy, lecherous, afraid of death, selfish, aggressive, unsympathetic, and without any ideals. It could be said that he was just the most ordinary person among all living beings. With great power came great responsibility, what benefiting the world, what making the earth evolve and advance, what the hell. He was not interested at all, he just wanted to make himself more comfortable, safer, and more enjoyable. This was his purpose. Of course, he also had a bottom line. Other than that, he was just an ordinary young man in society. He was not a genius, he had no ambition, and from the beginning to the end, he did not have any clear goals. Therefore, his sense of immersion was quite strong. The only difference was that he had a dragon ball in his body, that was all. Other than that, he was no different from an ordinary young man. People were afraid of losing. In the past, Jiang Hai did not have anything to lose, the only thing he could lose was his life. Therefore, even ants would drag out their lives, let alone Jiang Hai. Therefore, in the past, Jiang Hai was also afraid of death. However, he estimated that no one would harm him, and now he was also afraid of death, because others had a reason to harm him. His manner, his money, and his identity were all extremely sensitive. Therefore, in addition to bringing bodyguards, he also needed some official things to protect himself. He would speak according to the country he was in. If he was in China, the best way to protect himself would be to contact the higher-ups and make friends with some second-generation officials or third-generation officials. Naturally, he would be able to live a good life. But in the United States, being a government official was useless because the Americans didn't care about government officials at all. If you wanted to survive in the United States, the most important thing was money. In this capitalist society, only money was recognized, not people. Most importantly, just having money wasn't enough because there were people who were richer than you. You had to have something that could save your life, such as oil futures. This was also one of the reasons why Jiang Hai was so careful. He was afraid of death, it was that simple. Forget it, I can't control you. You don't have to explain to me. I am not related to you. You can do as you see fit. She didn't know why, but when Bernice heard that Jiang Hai was going to leave, she couldn't help but feel annoyed. But on second thought, what was there to be annoyed about? She was not related to him, so what was there to be annoyed about? So after hesitating for a moment, she said directly, then lowered her head to eat the steak in front of her. Seeing that she did not speak, Jiang Hai also glanced at her carefully. He muttered in his heart, is this girl on her period? Why is she so impulsive? When she heard that I was leaving, it was as if she wanted to eat me. Is there a mistake? Just as Jiang Hai was muttering there, the doorbell outside rang. Chapter 507. Hearing the doorbell, Jiang Hai was stunned. He walked to the door and picked it up. There were two people standing outside the door. Jiang Hai was familiar with them. One was Doyle George. After all, he had fought side by side with Jiang Hai. After that incident, Doyle was transferred to the Boston Police Department and became a sheriff. He was directly promoted with seniority. It seemed that his family was at least very powerful in the police field. Jiang Hai also had some impression of the other person. He was a big guy. Jiang Hai had seen him 3 times. The first time was in an underground boxing match in Miami. At that time, he beat someone to death and was seriously injured. The second time was on the streets of Miami. He found him interesting, so he invited him to eat a hamburger. At the same time, there was a car accident. Of course, 70% of the treatment fee for this big guy was paid by Zhang Heng. The 4 girls who hit him didn't have much money. Their families could only pay for the basic treatment. The follow-up health care and other expenses, such as the treatment of his original internal injuries, were all paid by Jiang Hai. The third time they met was in his villa. This guy was Jiang Hai's enemy, but for some reason, he betrayed him at the last moment. He saved Alina and the others, giving them time to release Azalina and deal with the invaders. Then he was sent to the hospital. Although Jiang Hai couldn't wait to kill all those who invaded his home, this guy helped him a lot. But after all, this guy had helped him, so Jiang Hai didn't find trouble with him. Instead, he cured him. But now, seeing them come, Jiang Hai was a little confused. What are they doing here? Are they thanking me? This was the most likely reason, but Jiang Hai really didn't know the specifics. Hey, Doyle, how come you have time to come here? Looking at the 2 people on the other side of the phone, since he couldn't figure it out, he might as well ask directly. Jiang Hai wasn't the kind of person who liked to keep things to himself. Hey, man, you're right. I'm very busy. This time I'm mainly here to accompany this big guy. Open the door first, let's go in and talk. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Doyle George said with a smile on his face. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai didn't doubt him. He opened the door directly and waited for the 2 in front of the villa. After the door was opened, the 2 returned to the car and then drove into Jiang Hai's manor. After parking the car in the parking lot, the 2 also walked out. Looking at Jiang Hai standing at the door, Conrad couldn't help trembling. He had spent a lot of effort to find Jiang Hai, but fortunately, he finally found him. Come in, come in. Benefactor. Seeing the 2 coming, Jiang Hai also took a few steps forward and greeted the 2 of them, but before he finished speaking, Conrad had already taken a few big steps to the front of the villa, knelt in front of Jiang Hai, and kowtowed heavily to Jiang Hai. After all, this is a concrete floor. As soon as his head touched the ground, it made a banging sound, but Jiang Hai was startled. He immediately jumped down and supported Connerson Peters, who was still kowtowing. What's going on? He didn't understand. Benefactor, do you still remember me? I heard that in Huaxia, you have to express your gratitude in this way. Looking at Jiang Hai, Conrad said in a muffled voice. Although his brain is not working properly, he is not stupid, at least he can still speak clearly. You don't have to do this. Really, get up quickly. Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile when he felt this guy's immense strength and wanted to kowtow. He had to admit that this guy's strength was quite strong. Judging from Jiang Hai's actions, this guy's strength should be very close to the limit of human strength. But compared to Jiang Hai, he was still far from Jiang Hai's strength, which was 4 times the limit of human strength. Therefore, under Conrad's surprised gaze, Jiang Hai directly lifted him up, which made Conrad extremely surprised. He had never experienced someone being able to lift him up directly in his life. At this moment, he looked at Jiang Hai with a burning gaze. He only admired one kind of person in his life, and that was those who were stronger than him. Jiang Hai had saved his life and was stronger than him. Thinking of this, in Conrad's simple heart, Jiang Hai had already become his benefactor and an object of worship. Who the hell is this? He's so heavy, how can you lift him up? I'm really starting to doubt your genes, brother. Are you a humanoid Tyrannosaurus Rex? Or an alien? Say, what are you doing on Earth? Are you preparing to invade Earth? Seeing Jiang Hai actually lifting Conrad up, Doyle George, who was walking over, could not help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he said in surprise. "Fa, the purpose of my visit to Earth is to settle things with your sister." After helping Conrad stand up, Jiang Hai rolled his eyes at Doyle. After spitting out the word F, he looked at Doyle and said in a mocking tone. "Unfortunately, I don't have a sister. If I did, I would definitely let her marry you. Being targeted by a billionaire, such a wonderful thing must be a great thing for her. Unfortunately, in an open country like the United States, such jokes were not taken seriously by the Americans. Instead, Doyle used this sentence to make fun of him. I can't be bothered with you. Let's go in first." Ignoring this guy's sultry look, Jiang Hai waved his hand and led the two into his villa. But the moment Conrad stepped into the villa, Azalina, who was cutting the steak, Little Huang and Xiao Bai, who were playing in the distance, as well as Dai and Chirpy, were all shocked. They looked at Conrad with vigilant expressions. In particular, Little Huang and Xiao Bai were no longer playing. Instead, they slowly leaned over and stared at Conrad with a pair of wolf-like eyes. Animals were extremely sensitive to murderous aura. No matter how much blood a person had on his hands, no matter how ruthless he was, as long as he had not killed anyone, it was only a murderous aura, not a murderous aura. Only when a person had truly been stained with human life would it be a murderous aura. For example, some boxers or martial artists made a career out of beating people up every day. Their hands were stained with the blood of their enemies, as well as their own. This made them fearless and ruthless when they fought. However, everyone knew that they would act appropriately and would not kill anyone. Thus, there was no such thing as murderous aura, but a ruthless murderous aura. However, some people who had been stained with human life were completely different. They had really killed people. When others fought with them, they would be afraid because they knew that if they lost, they would die. Thus, they would lose their composure. This was also why those perverted murderers in the wanted posters were usually gentle and did not look like such people at all. It was hard to imagine how their hands were stained with so many human lives. Knerson Peters was an underground boxer. He had been boxing for more than 10 years. He had been boxing since he was 14 years old. This year, he was already 29 years old. He was even 1 year older than Jiang Hai. In 15 years, he had fought a total of 34 boxing matches and won all 34 matches. This was because if he lost a match, he would be abandoned. Even if the opponent did not beat him to death, he would be beaten to death by the boss. Therefore, among these underground boxers, who had been stained with human life, everyone had a murderous aura. It was also because of this murderous aura that he was targeted as soon as he walked in. Animals were extremely sensitive to murderous aura. As for Azalina, it was because of her profession. Don't forget what she used to do. Naturally, she had received special training. Although she had not done this training for a long time, she found someone who had the same murderous aura as her. Her intuition could not be wrong. But the difference between her and Conrad was that she could control and release it freely, while he could not. However, even though they could feel it, they didn't move. This was because they could also feel that his murderous aura was only consciously released from his body. This meant that he didn't have any murderous intent towards Jiang Hai and these people. Have you eaten? You can have a bite here. In the United States, very few people would invite others to eat at their home. In the United States, there was rarely such a thing. Treating guests to a meal was treating guests to a meal. There was no such thing as a home-cooked meal. Therefore, in the United States, it was rare to see people in other people's homes at noon or in the evening, unless they said that they wanted to treat you to a meal. However, Jiang Hai was not an American. According to the saying of Huaxia people, since they were here, they should eat together. For Jiang Hai's words, Doyle was somewhat not used to it, but he also knew that Jiang Hai was not just being polite, so he did not be too polite. He directly sat at the table, and Conrad also sat there. After Jiang Hai brought them new tableware, he no longer cared about them and started to eat. As for Doyle and Conrad, they also started to eat steaks, but when they had their first bite, their eyes couldn't help but brighten. Conrad only knew that this steak was delicious. But Doyle knew that this steak was not ordinary. Today's steak was not made by Jiang Hai, but by Xiaoya. During the days when Jiang Hai and the others were away, she also studied Western food, although her cooking was still far inferior to those Western chefs. But compared to Jiang Hai, it was already heaven and earth. For Jiang Hai's beef, she naturally knew that it was excellent. If she let Jiang Hai continue to cook like this, it would really be a waste, so now she was also trying to save these steaks. Looking at the two eating without caring about their image, Jiang Hai secretly scolded country bumpkins in his heart. But after thinking about it, this also proved that his beef was really good. Thinking about it, he still felt a little happy. Eat more if you like. I don't have much other things, but this is a game. Chapter 508. Upon hearing Jiang Hai's words, Doyle George said without raising his head, "Of course, I won't stand on ceremony. You're a tycoon." But Conrad, who was beside him, was stunned for a moment, and then put down the fork in his hand. "What's wrong? Not to your liking?" Looking at him, Jiang Hai was taken aback for a moment, and then asked him. "No, it's delicious, it's really delicious, but I'm not here to eat steak. Mr. Jiang Hai, you've begged me twice. I, Conrad, don't have much money, nor do I have any ability. I only have a body that isn't afraid of hardship, so I want to repay you." Looking at Jiang Hai, Conrad said in a muffled voice. But as soon as his voice fell, the people at the table couldn't help but stop what they were doing. In particular, Bernice looked at Conrad in surprise, and then at Jiang Hai. That look made Jiang Hai quite speechless. But at this time, Jiang Hai didn't have the leisure to care about her, because after Conrad's voice fell, he couldn't help but feel his chrysanthemum tighten. Is this big guy interested in me? Even if he wants to repay me with his body, it has to be a beautiful woman. What's this? After a few seconds of silence, Jiang Hai said with a smile, I'm a person who doesn't ask for anything in return. No, it's up to you to decide whether you want to accept my gratitude, but it's up to me to decide whether I want to repay it." But Conrad's brain wasn't very good to begin with, so how could he understand this now? He said to Jiang Hai with a serious face. "But I really don't need it." Looking at Conrad, Jiang Hai immediately said. At this time, he didn't care whether he would hurt his feelings or not. Jiang Hai had no interest in men. He was a straight man who was harder than steel until he had no friends. Jiang Hai, I think you might have misunderstood what Conrad meant. He doesn't seem to have such thoughts in his mind. He doesn't seem to be interested in men or women. You should know what I'm talking about. When he said that he wanted to repay the debt of gratitude, he seemed to mean it literally. Looking at the determined look on Jiang Hai's face and the fact that Jiang Hai was too anxious to speak, Doyle George couldn't help but wipe the sweat off his forehead. Fortunately, he had interacted with Conrad many times, so he was the only one who could speak clearly now. Upon hearing what he said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but open his mouth, not knowing what to say. Sigh, someone's thoughts are really dirty. Just when Jiang Hai was feeling a little embarrassed, Bernice also picked up a piece of steak and ate it while speaking proudly. She didn't know who had such a big reaction just now. Dirty my foot. But then again, I really don't need him to repay any debt of gratitude. Scratching his head, Jiang Hai looked at the big guy in front of him speechlessly. If Azalina hadn't appeared, he would have been a very good bodyguard. But now that Azalina and Bale were around, Jiang Hai didn't need him to be a bodyguard anymore. Moreover, the most important thing is that he doesn't know how to herd animals or catch fish. What use does Jiang Hai have for him? After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Doyle actually understood that Jiang Hai had no use for him. Sigh, I think you probably know a little about his situation. Instead of letting him go out and be used by bad people and die out there, it's better to let him follow you. You're a billionaire now, so you should at least have a bodyguard by your side, right? However, since he and Conrad were acquaintances, it was impossible for him to watch Conrad go down the wrong path again. With Jiang Hai around, he felt relieved. Bodyguard? Okay. Looking at Conrad's anxious look, Jiang Hai thought for a moment, then looked at Azalina. When Azalina nodded, Jiang Hai nodded in acknowledgement of his existence. Thank you, benefactor. I'll do my best to protect you. Seeing that Jiang Hai had agreed, Conrad also stood up excitedly. For him, it was absolutely impossible to not repay a debt of gratitude. Being a bodyguard by Jiang Hai's side was definitely a very good thing for him. As for Doyle George, he could now rest assured. The reason why Jiang Hai accepted him as a bodyguard was actually that he had some ideas. Sometimes, there were some things that Azalina was a woman, after all, and it was not easy for her to do. For example, deterrence. Who was more deterrent, a woman who looked about 1.8 meters tall and capable, or a man who was more than 2 meters tall, strong, fierce, and exuding a murderous aura? Just like what Jiang Hai had said before, he was very afraid of trouble, but if he had a beautiful woman by his side, there might be some idiots who would come for him. However, if he had such a guy by his side, he could probably scare off more than 95% of his enemies. This would have the effect of subduing the enemy without a fight. Jiang Hai was not the kind of person who would take pleasure in trampling on others, although it was indeed a very satisfying thing to trample on others sometimes. However, this matter also depended on the situation. It was very interesting in the early stages, but with Jiang Hai's current strength, if there were any idiots who came looking for trouble, then they would not be trampling on others, but on the brain. As his level increased, the people he wanted to trample on would naturally also increase in level. As for Azalina, she had naturally received Jiang Hai's message, and in fact, she thought so too. With such a strong, deterrent, and simple-minded person who was absolutely loyal to Jiang Hai, it would be a lot easier for her. Besides, Jiang Hai now had a net worth of billions. It was indeed a little difficult to have only one bodyguard, but with this guy, it would be much easier. Since he had agreed to accept him as a bodyguard, Jiang Hai would give him an official identity. After lunch, Jiang Hai called Moses Adams and asked him to prepare a bodyguard contract. The bodyguard's contract was the same as Azalina's, but there were some differences, because Conrad's salary was less than hers. However, Conrad didn't care. In any case, as long as he had food to eat and clothes to wear, he didn't have any concept of money. Jiang Hai gave him a salary of $1,000 a week. Apart from the missions, his base salary for a year was $52,000. Most importantly, he didn't need to pay taxes. Jiang Hai would pay all the taxes, including food, accommodation, and equipment. When he heard Jiang Hai's salary, to be honest, Doyle even wanted to come over and be Jiang Hai's bodyguard. But unfortunately, even if he came over, Jiang Hai wouldn't want him. What ability did he have to eat and wait for death at Jiang Hai's place? The contract was in triplicate and was delivered by Penelope Dahl in the afternoon. This was the first time Jiang Hai saw Penelope Dahl since he came back from Huaxia, but at this time, she didn't seem to have anything to say to Jiang Hai. After delivering the contract and watching Jiang Hai and Connerson Peters sign their names, she went to find her father. This made Jiang Hai feel a little embarrassed. Just now, he greeted her warmly, but in the end, he only got an N. Serves you right. Seeing Jiang Hai eat a turtle, Bernice was very happy and said softly with a smile on her face. Jiang Hai looked at Penelope as she left. He didn't want to disturb her conversation with her father. After all, the misunderstanding between her and her father had only been resolved recently. Actually, it wasn't that Jiang Hai said anything. If it wasn't for the fact that she saw that her father could really earn money from her, she probably wouldn't have bothered with her father. But you could say that she was realistic. She returned the money her father gave her, intact. Jiang Hai didn't know what to say to her, so he could only not be a third wheel. Therefore, after thinking about it for a while, he realized that Connerson didn't have a place to stay, so he went to find a place for Connerson to stay. In fact, it was reasonable to say that a bodyguard should live in the same building as Jiang Hai, but Jiang Hai's side was full of women except for him. It was indeed a little inconvenient, so although there were many empty rooms, Jiang Hai didn't let him live here. Jiang Hai's family had a lot of villas for workers. When these villas were first built, the previous owner probably built them with full ranches, full fishing grounds, and full wineries. But he didn't think that Jiang Hai was a little too generous. Logically speaking, a villa had 3 rooms, so 3 people should live in it. As for the wives of the cowboy and the fisherman, they lived separately. Even if they lived together, they lived in one room. But Jiang Hai was different. He divided them according to family. So now there was not a single empty house. In this case, they could only squeeze in. The person Jiang Hai chose was none other than Harriman Fells, because in his manner, he was probably the easiest person to talk to. Sure enough, when Jiang Hai told Harriman Fells about this matter, Harriman happily agreed. He and Conrad were actually the same kind of people. Their brains were a bit slow, but they were tall, exceptionally powerful, and their strength was not small. It was just that their lives were completely different. Conrad was cheated by his friend and went to fight in the underground boxing ring for more than 10 years. In the end, he didn't leave a penny. He was only left with a body full of injuries and terrifying combat power. But Jiang Hai didn't care about these injuries, because his spiritual energy could easily heal those internal injuries. And Harriman, with the help of many kind neighbors, lived peacefully in Winthrop as a cowboy. And he met Jiang Hai, a good boss, so their experiences were completely different. But now that the two of them met, they really felt a little regretful that they hadn't met earlier. Looking at the two who were very satisfied, Jiang Hai was also very satisfied. Standing in front of them, Jiang Hai looked at them. When the two of them stood together, their aura was really a little scary. The 2 men were more than 2 meters tall, and their bodies were abnormally huge. One of them exercised all year round, and the other herded cows all year round. Their muscles were not small. If they put on a straight face, shave their heads, get some tattoos, wear a black suit, and wear sunglasses. TSK, it would be very cool just thinking about it. In case Jiang Hai went out to negotiate or something in the future, he could definitely bring these 2 people with him. They could definitely scare a group of people. After settling Conrad down, Jiang Hai returned to his villa. He lay down on the white jade bed and began to think about his next move. Chapter 509. how are you doing here? Lying on a recliner made of jade, Jiang Hai wore sunglasses and looked at the sun in the sky while asking Conrad, who was practicing beside him. Very good. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad, who was doing push-ups with all his might, replied in a muffled voice, then continued to train, allowing sweat to drip from his body. Are you having a good time with Harriman? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai continued to ask. Very good. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad was still doing his push-ups and continued to say. How are you getting along with the others? Seeing that he still said the same two words, Jiang Hai continued to lie there and asked him. Very good. But unfortunately, the answer to Jiang Hai was still the same two words. Hey, can't you say something else? Sitting up helplessly, Jiang Hai raised the sunglasses on his face and looked at Conrad helplessly. Does this guy have no other words other than saying very good? Not bad. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad hesitated for a moment and changed from very good to another word. TCH, waving his hand at him, Jiang Hai continued to lie down. It's very comfortable to bask in the sun here. Today is August 22nd, and it's also the 5th day since Conrad came to Jiang Hai's house. These days, Conrad was still a little reserved when he first came. Basically, he would come to Jiang Hai's villa when he got up in the morning. Wherever Jiang Hai went, he would follow. According to him, he is Jiang Hai's bodyguard. So naturally, he should go wherever Jiang Hai goes, but Jiang Hai is not going to take such a guy with him. So on the 3rd day, Jiang Hai told him that he doesn't need to follow him, and he can do whatever he wants. But he really has nothing to do. After inadvertently seeing the training room in Jiang Hai's villa that is not used except for storms, he told Jiang Hai that he wanted to borrow those training equipment. Jiang Hai naturally had no problem with this. He was happy that this guy didn't follow him, so he immediately lent it all out. He even took the initiative to drive him to the town to pick out a few sets of sportswear. Of course, they were all Nike because these things were not expensive here. According to Jiang Hai, he wanted to let him use the equipment here directly. But Conrad was unwilling. He only took a series of things such as sandbags and dumbbells and moved them to the lawn of the villa. Then he began to practice there. Next to this place was originally the place where Jiang Hai usually basked in the sun. That is, the place where Bernice likes to snatch Jiang Hai's place, but in the next few months, she will not snatch Jiang Hai's place. Because the sun has been too strong recently. Although she also likes to bask in the sun, she is not going to get tanned. So in these 2 days, Conrad no longer followed Jiang Hai, but when Jiang Hai is basking in the sun here, there is always a fierce man training beside him, which makes Jiang Hai a little dumbfounded. But no matter what, he is adapting to everything. Jiang Hai estimated that it is difficult to change this guy's mind. Since he can't change him, he can only let himself adapt. Jiang Hai, aren't you leaving tomorrow? Aren't you going to prepare some luggage or something? Looking at Jiang Hai's leisurely appearance, Bernice, who had just picked some fresh vegetables from the vegetable garden at this time, said with some dissatisfaction. Bernice seems to like staying in Jiang Hai's manor more and more recently. She gave up such a big research institute in Miami and just stayed here with Jiang Hai. Of course, Jiang Hai doesn't care whether she stays here or not. Recently, Little Ya's condition has further improved. Although her appearance is still the same, without a trace of blood like a vampire, she can bask in the sun in the room all day long. Even in the morning and evening, Bernice has allowed her to go out, but from 10 o'clock in the morning, she will be grounded until 4 o'clock in the afternoon. These 6 hours are unshakable, and she needs to slowly adapt. But for Little Ya, this is already great news. It is precisely because she doesn't have to always look after Little Ya that Bernice also walks around the manor all day long. Everyone knows her, and everyone also knows that this woman and Jiang Hai have some unclear relationship. And most importantly, whether it is Delina, Marion, or Aphrodite, they are all a little afraid of her. These people who are close to Jiang Hai don't dare to provoke, the fishermen and cowboys naturally don't dare to provoke them. Even Dulles and his apprentice are respectful to Bernice. Of course, they are more wary of her identity as a doctor. In the United States, the professional status of a doctor is still very high, very high. And this Bernice doesn't know what's wrong with her, but when she saw Jiang Hai lazily sitting there, she couldn't help but get angry. Hey, what's there to pack up? I'm just going for 2 or 3 days. It's not good to let others wait for me on the same day, they are royalty, right? Then I'll do something the next day, and if there's a banquet in the evening, I'll come back on the 3rd day. If there's no banquet, I'll come back directly. Jiang Hai lazily glanced at Bernice, and said in a very tired voice. It's really unbearable. If there's nothing, why don't you go to town and take a look? These tour groups were brought here by you. Aren't you worried about any disputes? Why don't you go and see the income of your shooting range? Why don't you go and see the income of your villas? Seeing that Jiang Hai is still half dead, Bernice began to talk with money. But unfortunately, Bernice's words have no meaning. Who told Jiang Hai to not care about money at all? Hey, what's yours is yours, don't force it if it's not yours. If I go, won't the disputes still happen? Moses Adams sent people to watch the villas and the shooting range. I'm not a professional, why should I watch? Glancing at Bernice, Jiang Hai still said slowly. Listening to his words, she really wants to kick him. Who cares if you die? Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Bernice glared at him and walked into the villa. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also changed his position to lie down, but just as he lay down, he saw Conrad's big face. What? Seeing his big face, Jiang Hai was shocked, so he immediately asked him. Boss, if you want to go to Atlantic City, I'll go with you. Looking at Jiang Hai, it was obvious that Conrad's expression was not very clear. Jiang Hai listened to his words and couldn't help but smile. If it weren't for the 5 days of contact, he probably would have thought that this was a confession. No need, you stay at home and look after the house. With a wave of his hand, Jiang Hai directly ordered. But I'm your bodyguard. Looking at Jiang Hai, Conrad said with a serious face. Protecting Jiang Hai is his duty. I said no need, so there's no need. Why don't we try a fight? Hearing Conrad's words, Jiang Hai raised his eyebrows and said with a serious face. Since he can't talk to him, then he'll use his fists to make him understand this truth. Fight? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad also looked at Jiang Hai strangely. What does this sentence mean? That's right, let's fight. How about this, let's fight. If I win, you'll have to listen to me in the future. You're my bodyguard, right? You'll do whatever I tell you to do. If you win, then you can do whatever you want. Looking at the puzzled Conrad in front of him, Jiang Hai suddenly sat up and said excitedly. Really? Then I can go to Atlantic City with you? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Conrad was also very excited. His big eyes shone with a fierce light. To be honest, the reason he went to the underground boxing scene was partly because he was cheated by his friends, and partly because he really liked to fight. Of course, he would still hold back his strength when fighting with Jiang Hai, but it didn't mean that he would give up fighting. Of course it's true. As soon as Jiang Hai's voice fell, Conrad's big hand came slapping over. On August 23rd, on the road from Boston to New York, Jiang Hai drove his combat spirit. He wore sunglasses and whistled. Feeling the empty car, he couldn't help but sing along with the music on the radio. At this time, in Jiang Hai's manner, Conrad was training hard, but in addition to the muscles on his body, there were some purplish bruises, which also represented the results of his fight with Jiang Hai yesterday. To be honest, when Conrad fought with Jiang Hai, it really scared Jiang Hai at first. After all, this guy had killed people, and that murderous aura was real. Although Jiang Hai had killed people before, it was all in self-defense, and he had never taken the initiative to attack. Therefore, at first, he was really intimidated by this murderous aura, and took a few punches seriously. But then, his physical fitness that was 4 times that of an ordinary person, in addition to his powerful combat power, broke out here. No matter how strong Conrad was, he was just an ordinary person. How could he be a match for Jiang Hai, a human-shaped Tyrannosaurus Rex? In the end, he was beaten up by Jiang Hai. This was also the reason why Jiang Hai was here now, and why he was at home. I'm looking afar, on the moon, how many dreams are flying freely. Jiang Hai sang like this. The car passed through Boston, New York, entered New Jersey, and arrived in Atlantic City. Last time, Jiang Hai came in a hurry and left in an even more hurry, so he didn't have time to appreciate the situation of the second largest gambling city in the United States. This time, he wasn't going to leave like last time. As for Walton, sigh, it was better not to see it if possible. Bam! Just as Jiang Hai was playing and singing along the way, preparing to enjoy the scenery of the gambling city tonight, a car suddenly stopped in the opposite lane, then changed direction and stopped directly in front of Jiang Hai. Chapter 5:10. F***CK, what's the situation? Jiang Hai stepped on the brakes. The quality of Jiang Hai's shield was good. Although he stepped on the brakes, the braking was still quite good. He only slid forward a few meters before coming to a stop. But this shook him a lot. He opened the door with some doubts, and Jiang Hai stretched his head out. In broad daylight, on the road, is there someone who wants to deal with me? Is this person too stupid? Here, the police can come here in less than a minute. What the hell is this? Just as Jiang Hai was puzzled, 3 people came down from the opposite car. When he saw these 3 people, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, a trace of embarrassment flashed across his face. Because these 3 people, to be exact, he knew them. Ugh, hi, how did I meet you here? Yes, the person who came out of the car at this time was not someone else. It was Walton and the other 2 women, Cheryl Lee and Barbara Martina, who had sex with Jiang Hai that day. When these 3 women came out, Jiang Hai subconsciously knew that the situation might not be good. Not bad, you still remember me. Come out. Walking to the front of Jiang Hai's car door, Walton looked at Jiang Hai with a smile. Then, without giving Jiang Hai a chance to resist, she directly opened his driver's door from the inside, and then pulled Jiang Hai out. Of course, Jiang Hai was afraid of hurting her. Otherwise, with her little strength, how could she pull Jiang Hai? Hey, what are you doing? Looking at her rough actions, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little stunned. What's the situation? You still have the nerve to ask me what I'm doing. You will know in a while. You 2 go and drive. Let's go back. Glancing at the panicked Jiang Hai, Walton directly opened the back door of Jiang Hai's car, threw Jiang Hai in, and said to the 2 women behind her. The 2 women naturally knew what Walton meant, so one got in their own car, and the other got in Jiang Hai's car. The car started again and went to Walton's home in Atlantic City. Hey, I still have something to do. Hurry up. Feeling the car driving away, Jiang Hai couldn't help but smile bitterly. He wanted to explain something, but before he finished speaking, Walton's mouth had already kissed Jiang Hai's mouth. The tongue flexibly invaded Jiang Hai's mouth. Although Walton had little experience in this area, she was much more familiar with kissing and touching than Jiang Hai. After all, there were so many girls for her to train. For a while, Jiang Hai didn't dare to move. He was afraid of hurting Walton, but he was so passive that he didn't know what to do. Well, it tastes good. Cheryl, it really has a completely different feeling from you. The smell of sweat on the man's body is quite good after smelling it for a long time. Walton raised her head again. There was still a trace of transparent liquid on her and Jiang Hai's lips, but she didn't care. After saying something to Cheryl who was driving, she kissed Jiang Hai under his surprised gaze. The 2 communicated with each other for about 10 minutes before Walton panted and left. Hey, I said, is that enough? Jiang Hai said speechlessly after wiping his mouth full of saliva. Enough? How is that possible? Do you think it's possible without a real fight? Narrowing her eyes, Prawalton slowly climbed onto Jiang Hai's body. She looked at Jiang Hai with narrowed eyes and smiled. Then she grabbed Jiang Hai's weapon. With this grab, Jiang Hai couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. This woman wouldn't want to waste him, right? Just as Jiang Hai was about to resist even if it meant hurting her, Prawalton suddenly released his weapon and then bent down clumsily. Feeling her movements, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel a little confused and a little panicked. He looked at the cars that kept passing by outside the window. To be honest, it wasn't that he hadn't done it in the car before. For example, he had done it with Ai Xiaoxi and Feng Yunshen when they were together, but they chose some more remote and quiet places. It was his first time driving while on the road. The feeling of excitement and shyness came together, and it seemed to make Jiang Hai's desire to fight stronger. At this time, Prawalton, who felt that Jiang Hai was different, also raised her head and squatted there with a smile. She took off her black dress from the bottom to the top. In an instant, her naked body appeared in front of Jiang Hai. It seems that she has been prepared for a long time. Then she gently pushed Jiang Hai, motioning for Jiang Hai to lie down, and then she sat on Jiang Hai's body. With a soft moan, the old driver went on the road again. This drifting made Jiang Hai somewhat unprepared. "Hey, are you crazy?" Jiang Hai said to Prawalton in a low voice as he propped up his upper body. "Shut up, just cooperate with me. You don't know how sad you made me these days. I thought it was enough for me to have a woman, but it was you who let me know it. Now, I like it the most, Prawalton said to Jiang Hai with a look of displeasure as she glanced at Jiang Hai. "Even if you want to do that, you have to go back first. What's going on now?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was really embarrassed, but there were indeed some things that he did. Now that he mentioned it, it was really a bit troublesome. "What's going on? You didn't even tell me that you came to Atlantic City. What's going on?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton bent down while moving and looked at Jiang Hai with a playful expression. "I said, I'm here to discuss business." With a slightly awkward smile, Jiang Hai said somewhat speechlessly. "Then this is my business." Seeing Jiang Hai's appearance, Prawalton glanced at him and said with a smile. "Don't blame me for this." Looking at her engrossed appearance, Jiang Hai gritted his teeth. If he doesn't hurry up, who knows what will happen in a while. Thinking of this, Jiang Hai also took the initiative to join the battlefield and blew the horn to charge. "Hey, don't move." Feeling Jiang Hai launching a new round of charge, Prawalton was also taken aback. What a joke, she knows Jiang Hai's combat power. If he gets serious, she is no match for him. But Jiang Hai was not going to listen to her. Not only did he launch an attack, but his hands and mouth were also not idle. The instantaneous attack made Prawalton a little overwhelmed, and her body was powerless as Jiang Hai's attack came. On the other side, Cheryl, who was driving, kept looking at the scene in the rearview mirror. This made her subconsciously lick her lips and clamp her legs even tighter. But now that she was driving, she didn't want to have any accidents. But hearing the sound in her ear, she couldn't help but look at the rearview mirror, which could only make her drive very slowly. The drive that was originally more than half an hour took more than an hour to arrive. When the car drove into Prawalton's manor, she was already lying weakly on the steering wheel, and Prawalton was also lying weakly on Jiang Hai's body for the third time. As for Jiang Hai, he had also completed his second attack. Even if his physical fitness was 4 times that of ordinary people, he couldn't help but feel a little tired. Phew, get out of the car. After about 5 minutes, Prawalton sat up and forcibly pulled out the weapon that was still very strong. Ignoring the liquid that was flowing down from a certain part of his body, he opened the car door and walked out without wearing any clothes. "Hey!" Looking at her directly getting out of the car, Jiang Hai subconsciously glanced outside. Sure enough, there were people outside. Several women in maid outfits were standing respectfully in front of the car door at this time. They ignored Pra Walton's appearance, but they were looking at Jiang Hai curiously. This made Jiang Hai a little scared, and he subconsciously wanted to take his clothes and put them on, but at this time, Cheryl Lee in the driver's seat had already recovered. After walking to the car door, she grabbed all the clothes in her hand and handed them to the servant next to her. After the servant took the clothes, she directly left. "Hey, my clothes!" Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai really panicked and immediately shouted at that person. "Okay, what's there to shout about? They are all women, what are you shy about?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl glanced at Jiang Hai. "It's all this guy's fault. I can't keep my underwear today. It's precisely because they are all women that I have to be shy, okay? I'm not a woman." Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was quite speechless. What kind of logic is this? Is there a mistake? Didn't I look at the almanac before going out? Why do I always run into female hooligans? Tisk, with your relationship with Miss Pra, as long as you are willing, they are all yours. What are you shy about? Hurry up and get out. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Cheryl looked at Jiang Hai contemptuously, then pulled Jiang Hai out of the car. This Cheryl and Pra Walton were the same. They both had done it with Jiang Hai. Although Jiang Hai was a bit of a bastard, he didn't dare to hurt them. But he really didn't dare to use too much strength to hurt them. But when would it end if he kept pushing and giving in like this? Sighing helplessly, Jiang Hai grabbed the cushion on the seat next to him. No matter what, he couldn't just get out of the car like that. How embarrassing would that be? Covering his vital parts and bending his body, Jiang Hai walked to the car. Just as he got out of the car, Cheryl closed the door. This also cut off Jiang Hai's escape route, unless Jiang Hai wanted to run out naked. Looking at this situation, Jiang Hai couldn't help but feel his scalp tingle. He followed Cheryl into the villa while looking back 3 times with every step. Just as he entered the villa's hall, Jiang Hai was speechless when he saw the situation inside, because at this moment, Pra Walton was lying on a huge sofa in the hall. She was still naked. There were 4 women beside her. 3 of them were beside her. One let her head rest on her long legs and gently massage her head. Another let her legs rest on her legs and gently massage her legs. The last one was squatting in front of her, peeling off the grapes in the fruit plate in front of her. After removing the seeds, she put them in her mouth and fed them to her. Chapter 5:11. The only one who was relatively normal was standing respectfully in front of the sofa. But the most abnormal thing was that everyone, including Pra Walton, was naked. When Jiang Hai walked in, everyone looked at him with some curiosity, some envy, and some excitement in their eyes. Of course, Jiang Hai also knew the excited person. It was Barbara Martina, who was feeding Pra Walton grapes at this time. "Hey, Jiang, you're finally here. Miss, have you had enough? Is it my turn now?" Seeing Jiang Hai coming over and feeding Pra Walton a grape, Barbara Martina stood up excitedly and wanted to go to Jiang Hai. "Hey, I've been holding back all the way. I'll go first." Looking at the excited Barbara, before Jiang Hai had time to speak, he was hugged from behind. He looked back and saw that the person hugging him was none other than Cheryl Lee, who brought him in. He didn't know when she was also naked, hugging Jiang Hai from behind. Oh my God, what the hell is this? Feeling the oppression behind him, Jiang Hai was a little numb. Is my hidden attribute really that of a duckling? Why don't these female hooligans consider my feelings? Hey, at least you have something to look and listen to, unlike me who has to wait here. Hearing what Cheryl said, Barbara couldn't help but yell at her angrily. They would retreat in front of Pra Walton, but she wouldn't in front of others. Then I'll let you look and listen again. Hearing her words, Cheryl wasn't someone to be trifled with. She retorted forcefully. All right, aren't you afraid of making a fool of yourself in front of Jiang Hai? You've all tasted meat, so bear with it. Let the sisters who haven't tasted it go first. It's their first time and they need your support. But at that moment, Frau Walton waved her hand and set the tone. And hearing her words, the three women around her couldn't help but blush and lower their heads. Now, in their hearts, 70% were fear, 20% were doubts, and 10% had some inexplicable feelings. Hey, I'm not a breeder. I'm not here to breed, okay? Have you ever considered my feelings when you say that? Hearing that they had arranged his work, Jiang Hai was a little unhappy and said directly to Frau Walton. And at that moment, Barbara suddenly took the opportunity when Jiang Hai was talking to take his cushion away. Yo, your mouth is tough, but your body is honest. I know your physical fitness. Don't say those useless things. I'll leave it to you. Looking at the cushion being taken away, Frau Walton couldn't help but chuckle. Then, she winked at the three women around her. Although they were unwilling, they still walked over. They couldn't refuse Frau Walton's request. If you don't want to, you can resist. Looking at the three women who walked over, Jiang Hai said to them. But they shook their heads. As for Cheryl and Barbara, they had already squatted down. To them, a feast was on. In the situation where Jiang Hai was powerless to resist, the battle unfolded in the living room. 2 hours later, the battle venue changed to the bathroom. An hour later, it changed to the kitchen. An hour later, it changed to the dining room. After another hour and a half, they returned to Frau Walton's room. He didn't know if it was her original style, or if it was because she came back after seeing Jiang Hai's big bed. Frau Walton's bed was also very big. It was 6 meters wide and 3 meters wide. It wouldn't feel small even if 6 or 7 people slept on it. At this time, Jiang Hai and Frau Walton were lying side by side on her big bed. Jiang Hai's face was somewhat pale. Throughout the day, even when it was time to eat, he had been working hard to farm, even though his body was naturally gifted. He also felt that his waist was a little numb. This feeling was similar to when more than a dozen dolphins came into the manor. Jiang Hai released the aura of more than a dozen scales in one breath. The consumption was really huge. Are you trying to squeeze me dry? Jiang Hai said weakly as he looked at the 3 girls who were still working hard under him. These 3 girls were the ones that Jiang Hai had done something to earlier today. One was called Colin Barlovich, one was called Fail Fail, and one was called Isabel Roland. The last one, Isabel Roland, was Frau Walton's housekeeper. At the beginning, these 3 girls were very shy and afraid of Jiang Hai. They were also unwilling to move too much. As a result, after the first round, Jiang Hai discovered that it was all an illusion. Because he was kind enough to treat these girls, there was some pain in the beginning, but there was no follow-up damage. But who would have thought that this opened the door to a new world in their hearts? They could be considered to have tasted the taste of the marrow, and they had been taking turns to attack. You don't live with us every day. What do you have to be squeezed dry? Really? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Frau Walton rolled her eyes at him, and then touched Barbara who was under her, and Cheryl who was on her chest. They usually played like this. Looking at the scene in front of him, Jiang Hai was really speechless. Suddenly, Frau Walton turned her head and looked at Jiang Hai curiously. By the way, I heard that the more you use a man's thing, the better it is. Seeing that you are so good, you must have played with a lot of women. How should I put it? Outside hunting, it's not that many times, only 2 or 3, and it's very rare. Specifically, there are some fixed ones, about 3. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai didn't hide anything from her. After all, she knows that Frau Walton likes women, so it is impossible between him and her, so Jiang Hai treats her more as a brother, although the situation between her and him doesn't seem to be so pure. Only a few? *T. I have seen the 10 beauties in your manor, and they all like you. Will you do anything to them? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Frau Walton asked curiously. I'm still going to get married in the future. Besides, I'm a very possessive person. If they really follow me, I definitely won't let them go. At that time, who would want to be with such a playboy? And I can't marry them, so. Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little embarrassed. Don't you have a wife? We have met once. Hearing that Jiang Hai is going to get married, Prawalton was a little surprised. Well, that woman is indeed my wife, but nothing happened between us. Looking at her curious eyes, Jiang Hai thought about it and told her the truth about his love life. Speaking of it, Jiang Hai is really a shame for the rich. He not only doesn't have a proper wife, but he doesn't seem to have many lovers. In addition to Feng Yunshan and Ai Xiaoxi, there is only Selena Gomez. And the most important thing is that they are not by his side now. If he needs anything, he has to rely on little left and little right to solve it. It may be because of this that today, Jiang Hai will not refuse anyone. Wow, I didn't expect your life to be so complicated, but your life is a failure. Do you know how many women I have? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton said to Jiang Hai with a smile. I don't know. Discussing with a woman who has just fought with him how many women he has slept with, Jiang Hai is really. What the hell, this strong sense of contradiction is really not comparable to ordinary people. I should have had 517. Looking up at the ceiling, Prawalton thought for a moment and said. Me? Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was stunned. More than 500? Is it that exaggerated? The 5 of them are my wives, and will always stay by my side. However, women will get tired of looking at them all the time. So, I will still look for new women all over the world. They will also help me find things. Looking at Jiang Hai's surprised look, Prawalton said with a smile. Looking at her smug look, Jiang Hai really wanted to slap her to death. I have played with beauties all over the world, the United States, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, Japan, Korea, Huaxia, Soviet Russia, England, France, Germany. I have even played with North Korea and Africa. The women in each place are different. Looking at Jiang Hai, Prawalton also excitedly talked about her love history. As for Jiang Hai, listening to her words, he had no other way but to smile awkwardly. He is really a rookie. Do you know where the women are the most delicious? As if she didn't see Jiang Hai's embarrassment, Prawalton said excitedly. I don't know. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai really didn't know this. South Korea is the most fun. Seeing that Jiang Hai really didn't know, Prawalton didn't keep him in suspense and said with a serious face. South Korea? Hearing her words, the first thing that came to Jiang Hai's mind was the South Korean girl group. Her looks were indeed good and her figure was great. But when he thought about the most famous thing in South Korea, Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. They are very beautiful and have good figures, but don't you find that they look a bit alike? Looking at Prawalton, Jiang Hai looked at her and said with a smile, but as soon as his voice fell, Cheryl raised her head and glanced at him, which made Jiang Hai a little overwhelmed again. He forgot that there was still Cheryl. But Cheryl should be real. At least, Jiang Hai didn't feel any artificial traces on her. She is a natural beauty. I just want you to fight with them, not marry them. What are you worried about? Glancing at Jiang Hai, Prawalton directly refuted Jiang Hai's words, and Jiang Hai thought about it. It seems that she is right. Chapter 5:12. At night, the summer wind blew gently, taking away the heat in the room, and at the same time, it also took away that trace of strange smell. When it was midnight, Jiang Hai, who was sleeping in the middle, suddenly opened his eyes and glanced at the girls who were sleeping soundly beside him. Jiang Hai slowly got up. Because there were no clothes here, Jiang Hai could only walk out of the room with a bath towel wrapped around his waist. As soon as he walked out of the door, Jiang Hai couldn't help stroking his waist. What the hell, I won't be envious of those male protagonists anymore. It's really too tiring. It seems like our country's monogamy policy is not to protect the rights of women, but to allow men to live longer. After moving his body, Jiang Hai sighed. Since Prawalton got in his car, he had hardly stopped. In the car, he fought Prawalton twice. Here, he fought Colin Bavrovic, Fail Ferrio, and Isabelle Loren. Then, he fought Cheryl and Barbara. Then, he fought Prawalton. Then, he fought Colin Bavrovic, Isabelle Loren, and Fail Ferrio. It could be said that today, Jiang Hai didn't do anything else but fight. He fought a total of 13 times. Of course, the number of times these women fought was no less than that of Jiang Hai. After all, their fighting strength was not as good as Jiang Hai's. Jiang Hai had no problem fighting 2 of them at the same time. But fighting 6 of them at the same time, he was somewhat powerless. After all, he wasn't a professional. After patting his waist, Jiang Hai went downstairs to the bathroom. After going to the bathroom, he went to the kitchen. He had fought so many times today, including in the kitchen, so he didn't eat seriously. No one's body could stand it if he only ate and didn't eat, so now he had to find something to eat. However, after opening the refrigerator in the kitchen, Jiang Hai was depressed. There was nothing but wine and drinks. That's not right. If there's no food here, what did I eat for dinner? Looking at the full plate in front of him, but there was nothing to fill his stomach, Jiang Hai couldn't help but mutter in a low voice. We don't store leftovers here. What we eat every day is freshly made, whether it's bread or other things. Vegetables and meat are only bought on the same day, so there's nothing in the fridge. Just as Jiang Hai was struggling to listen, a voice suddenly sounded beside him. Jiang Hai looked back and found that Isabelle Roland had unknowingly run to his side. Compared to Jiang Hai, who shyly put on a bath towel, she was much more direct and naked. What the hell? You scared me. If you don't put anything in the fridge, where do you put it? Looking at the French beauty beside him, Jiang Hai was really shocked, but then he thought about it. What's there to be afraid of looking for food, so he asked her. Come with me. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Isabella took out 4 bottles of beer from inside and walked outside with Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai looked at her movements and couldn't help but be a little puzzled. What is she doing? Before Jiang Hai could react, she had already opened the door of the villa. Then 2 women in maid outfits appeared at the door. When they saw Isabel come out, they couldn't help but nod to her, indicating that they were greeting her. Prepare some supper for me. By the way, what do you want to eat? After saying something to the girl outside, Isabella looked at Jiang Hai. It seemed that she was no stranger to ordering food with her body naked. She should have done it a lot in the past. Anything is fine. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai was still a little shy, but he whispered in the dark. I remember that the people in the northeast of Huaxia like to eat kebabs. Let's do it like this. After thinking for a while, Isabella ordered the maid in front of her, then closed the door, and then took Jiang Hai to the balcony on the 2nd floor of the villa. She walked straight out of the villa and came to the balcony. At this time, there were a few chairs on the balcony. The chairs were made of real leather, and they were quite big boss chairs. Although Isabella was not short, about 1.75 meters, she was very thin, and when she sat on it, she sank into it. There were some blankets and the like on the chair, so she walked straight to the chair, curled her whole body into it, and then pulled the blanket over her back. She didn't have any movements to hide the moon and a certain brown forest in front of Jiang Hai, but it made Jiang Hai a little overwhelmed. Following her in, Jiang Hai also sat on an old chair, pulled the blanket over his body, and didn't know what to say. Although we have already done that kind of thing, we don't seem to be very familiar with each other. Let me introduce myself. My name is Isabelle Roland. I am the housekeeper of this manor and one of Miss Pulla's girlfriends. Of course, things like serving in bed are our honor. Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't speak, Isabella opened a bottle of Budweiser beer alone. After taking a sip, she took the initiative to talk to Jiang Hai. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also moved his mouth and opened a bottle of beer. Well, my name is Jiang Hai. I am from Huaxia. I am now running a manor in Boston. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai also introduced himself. In fact, he guessed that these girls knew about his situation. As expected, the moment he finished speaking, Isabel had already said, "I know you. Your beef is the best." This batch of beef made Pulla earn a lot of money and made her position in the family rise significantly. She was very happy during those few days and even specially organized a party for a week. "Unfortunately, at that time, you didn't have this kind of relationship with us. Otherwise, you could have joined as well." Just the party alone invited dozens of famous models and many socialites and outsiders. Hundreds of women openly organized a party here and the atmosphere was quite good. "If you came, you would have a great advantage," Isabella said while throwing a flirtatious glance at Jiang Hai. This almost made Jiang Hai choke to death. He almost couldn't handle 6 of them, and hundreds of them. But thinking of that scene, humph. He still wanted to live for a few more years. "Ahem, I have a doubt. To be honest, do you really like women? If it's true, why didn't you resist when she asked you to accompany me?" Since there was no way to continue this topic, Jiang Hai could only change the topic. But this matter was also the most puzzling point because he could see the resistance in these girls' eyes at the beginning. Resist? Why should we resist? Anyway, we just do what Miss Pulla told us. She won't harm us. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Isabella said calmly. What's the situation?" Looking at Isabella's appearance, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Why do they believe in Pra Walton so much? What confidence do they have to be in her hands? Or is it because they have such a tendency? To us, Pulla is not just a simple partner. In our eyes, Miss Pulla is our sky, our god. We will not do anything to disobey her or make her unhappy. As long as she asks us to do so, even if she asks us to die, we will not blink our eyes. Moreover, in the beginning, when we were with you, we were indeed a little scared. But after that, it felt pretty good. We have never experienced this feeling before." Looking at Jiang Hai, Isabella said with a smile, but her words made Jiang Hai even more curious. "What kind of feeling is this? Let me tell you a story." Looking at Jiang Hai's puzzled eyes, Isabella chuckled and then told a story to Jiang Hai. This story was a bit melodramatic but very simple. This story happened in the middle of France. The girl in the story originally had a happy family, but her father drank something because he made a mistake with a bad friend. In the end, the family was broken. He also fell ill once, but he did not have the money to buy medicine. As a result, he robbed a store. When he went out, he happened to meet the police and was directly shot to death. After this incident, the girl's mother took the girl away from the small town and went to a nearby city. She married a stepfather with a bad temper and an extreme alcoholic. At first, it was nothing more than some beatings and scoldings, which the girl could endure. But when the girl was 14 years old, the stepfather actually wanted to rape her. She desperately escaped and called the police. The police took her stepfather away, but her mother scolded her for being a jinx. Because of her, the family that her mother had rebuilt with great difficulty was broken again. One night, her mother left the house with her younger brother. At the age of 14, she had no choice but to find a job in order to survive, but she was targeted by a group of hooligans. These hooligans had snuck into her house with the intention of harming her. When she was escaping, she accidentally fell down and was caught by these hooligans. Just when she thought that her life was going to end just like that, she suddenly remembered something. A woman descended from the sky. Her bodyguards knocked down these hooligans and gave them the punishment they deserved. She followed this woman to the United States, followed this woman, received higher education, and became one of this woman's girlfriends. To this girl, this woman was her everything, her god. No matter what, as long as she still wanted her, she would do anything. This was Isabella's story. Jiang Hai sat at the side and listened to this slightly melodramatic story. However, he knew that this should be true. The women in this story should not be Isabella and Pra Walton. You can ask the other 4 stories if you have time, but they are basically similar to this. When the story was finished, the table in front of Jiang Hai and Isabella suddenly split open. A plate of barbecued meat rose from below and appeared in front of them. Chapter 5:13. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai woke up from his sleep with a special feeling. He opened his eyes in a daze and looked down. At this moment, Colin Barlovich and Fail Ferrio, whom he had just met yesterday, were working hard. Seeing this scene, there was no need to describe the feeling. "I say, what are you guys doing?" Patting himself on the forehead, Jiang Hai did not refuse their service. Early in the morning, as a man, he had a kind of, that kind of impulse. Someone to help him take care of it, seems to have gone off topic. "See, I said you were using too much force, just be a bit gentler." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Failor Ferrio patted Colin Bavrovich, who was still working hard, and said with a look of contempt. I'm sorry, I didn't think of that either. But I really like the taste of this. It would be even better if I added some of your taste." Colin smiled as he looked apologetically at Fail. "Then do you want to do it? Since he's awake?" Hearing Colin's words, Fail also came over. After the 2 women had a wet kiss, Fail looked at the person in front of him and suggested. "Good idea." Following Colin's words, Fail stood up and straddled Jiang Hai. "Hey, it's so early in the morning." Seeing Fail's actions, Jiang Hai couldn't help but immediately stop. "I can't care so much." Ignoring Jiang Hai's words, the battle between Fail and Jiang Hai began. Of course, Colin, who was behind them, would definitely be involved. When Jiang Hai woke up, he glanced at his watch. It was 7:50 in the morning. When he came out of the room, it was already 9:20. On the other side, Colin and Fail were already lying on the bed like mud. Although Jiang Hai's strength wasn't as strong as he wanted to be, dealing with 2 of them wasn't a problem. After dealing with these 2 guys, Jiang Hai went to the bathroom to wash up. There was a new set of things prepared for him. He didn't hold back. After washing up, he walked out of the room with the blanket he took from the rooftop yesterday. But just as he walked out, a woman wearing a maid uniform, who looked to be in her 20s, was already standing at the door waiting for him. "Mr. Jiang Hai, these are your clothes, we have already washed them." The woman looked at Jiang Hai and said seriously. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai saw the clothes in her hand, so he immediately took the clothes with a smile. Where's Prawalton?" After taking the clothes, Jiang Hai was ready to go back to change his clothes, but when he woke up in the morning, he only saw Kobe and Fail, which made Jiang Hai feel a bit strange, so he couldn't help but ask the maid. "Master is dealing with official business in the study, housekeeper Isabel is accompanying him in the study, Miss Cheryl Lee went out early, Miss Barbara is jogging outside." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the maid seriously said to Jiang Hai. "Oh, thank you." Hearing her words, Jiang Hai smiled, then nodded to her. "You're welcome. After you change your clothes, you can go to the study to find Master, or you can go to the dining room where you ate yesterday, breakfast is already prepared." Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the maid nodded to him again, then said respectfully. Hearing her mention the dining room, Jiang Hai's mind couldn't help but flash a bad image, then he smiled and flashed into the room. After changing his clothes, he left the room again. He first went to the study to take a look outside and found that Prawalton seemed to be checking some documents. Jiang Hai didn't disturb her, but went directly to the dining room and had breakfast. He has to admit, he doesn't know if Prawalton is very careful, or the people in this manor are very careful. Jiang Hai is a Huaxia person, and his breakfast is also prepared in the Huaxia style. To be exact, it's a northeastern style. His breakfast today is a bowl of tofu pudding and a few fried dough sticks, which are not common in the United States. Jiang Hai tasted it. Well, this tofu pudding also tastes very good, salty and fresh. It's very good. Although the fried dough sticks are prepared in advance, they are still hot. The outside is crispy, but there is a trace of toughness inside, which is very delicious. After eating 5 fried dough sticks and a large bowl of tofu pudding, Jiang Hai is full. Then he went to Prawalton's study. Although he had a good time yesterday, he didn't forget that he still had something to do today. Walking into the study, Jiang Hai saw Prawalton and Isabel Roland. Isabel saw Jiang Hai come in, made a gesture to hush, and then motioned Jiang Hai to sit on the sofa over there. Jiang Hai is not a person who likes to make trouble, so he didn't say anything and sat on the sofa over there. Last night, after he and Isabel finished eating skewers, the two of them didn't get any closer to each other. Although they kept a certain distance from each other, after a heart-to-heart talk, the two of them were indeed closer than the other 4. Today, looking at Jiang Hai, Isabel's face flashed a trace of blush. She is not a natural lesbian. She became a lesbian because of Prawalton's needs and because she has no other choice. However, after having a relationship with Jiang Hai, she doesn't reject Jiang Hai, because she also likes that kind of love. You're up. I thought you were going to sleep until the afternoon. What do you want to eat at noon? How about oysters? I heard that they are very nutritious for men. I have a batch of the best Ghidorah oysters in France here. I'll ask them to make it for you at noon. I've prepared a good show for you tonight. You have to be alert. Time passed by minute. After Prawalton finished correcting this document, he raised his head and looked at Jiang Hai with a chuckle and said to him, "Ahem, I don't think so. I told you before that I didn't come to Atlantic City to have fun. I have something to do." Hearing Prawalton say that there will be a good show in the evening, Jiang Hai was tempted for a moment, but he didn't come here to have fun. He still has something to do, so after hesitating for a moment, Jiang Hai still told her the truth. "Oh. You really have something to do? Is it convenient to tell me?" Hearing that Jiang Hai really has something to do, Prawalton couldn't help but look at him with some doubts and asked puzzledly. "It's not something that's convenient or inconvenient to say, but this is what the other party wants. I can only tell you that it's related to the royal family of the Middle East." Looking at Prawalton, Jiang Hai hesitated for a moment and said no directly, but after all, the two are very close to each other, so close that they already know each other's depth, so Jiang Hai still revealed a little. The royal family of the Middle East. Defayman Vihar Muhammad bin Rashid Al Maktoum? Hearing Jiang Hai mention the royal family of Dubai, Prawalton said a name almost instantly. Jiang Hai was shocked when he heard the name. "How do you know?" Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little dumbfounded. This guy is too powerful. It's not hard to guess. 90% of the royal families in the Middle East are very low-key. They are very prestigious in their country, but abroad, they are only called the Middle Eastern nouveau riche. But among these low-key people, there will be some more high-profile ones, and the one who has been the most active recently is him. Prawalton said with a chuckle as she tapped the table gently with the pen in her hand. Recently, he first quietly talked about a business with Hua Xia. Of course, this so-called quietly, in fact, everyone knows about it, and now he wants to see you. Well, let me think, the business with Hua Xia, is it related to you? Are you from the imperial court? Prawalton bit the cap of the pen and asked Jiang Hai a little strangely. Damn, you are too good at deceiving people, but I am not from the imperial court, but this line was indeed pulled by me. You are not from the United States, are you? Hearing Prawalton's words, Jiang Hai was really shocked. From some sporadic fragments in his reaction, she probably figured out the situation of the matter. It seems that this woman is really not ordinary. At least in terms of IQ, it is not a problem for her to crush him. In fact, Jiang Hai is too lazy. When the Dragon Ball was transforming his body, it was also transforming his brain, but if he didn't develop it, then there was no other way. I am from the Walton family, but second, I am Prawalton. The United States government, well, it has nothing to do with me, but you have to remember that you are now in the United States. This is something that can be used against you. Don't tell others easily, otherwise, someone will make things difficult for you. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Walton chuckled, and then said indifferently. Well, this time I'm going to solve the problem of how to fight back in case someone tries to make things difficult for me, or wants to take over my family business. Hearing what she said, Jiang Hai also seriously said to her. That's right. Oh. So confident? Then I will go with you. Looking at Jiang Hai's confident appearance, Walton chuckled. Okay. After thinking about it, Jiang Hai also nodded. Anyway, the deal between him and Du Feimin has already been agreed. He is not afraid of Walton interfering. Agreeing to let her follow is not bad for Jiang Hai. Where is the place? Seeing Jiang Hai agree, Walton also looked at Jiang Hai with interest. Caesar Palace, there is a UFC there today. That guy Du Feimin wants to see this thing, so he set the meeting place there. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai said a little bit. After all, in some TV dramas and novels before, he had heard the name of this casino a lot, but he had never been there once. It was really a loss of face for the rich. There? Okay, let's go after lunch. Looking at Jiang Hai's appearance, Walton chuckled. It seems that her little boyfriend still has a child's heart. Chapter 5:14. How is Atlantic City? Is it beautiful? Walton, who was lying in the passenger seat of Jiang Hai's battle shield and wearing sunglasses, asked Jiang Hai, who was driving. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but nod gently. It's very beautiful, but there are too few people. Jiang Hai is telling the truth. The buildings in Atlantic City are beautiful, the roads are wide, and there is a bay next to it. It looks like a treasure land. It is also the second largest gambling city in the United States and one of the top 4 gambling cities in the world. However, in Jiang Hai's opinion, this place is indeed a bit, well, too peaceful. There are very few people. Have you seen Atlantic Empire? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Walton turned to Jiang Hai and asked, but after hearing what she said, Jiang Hai nodded. Atlantic Empire is a very famous American TV series. Although he didn't finish watching it, he roughly watched it. Basically, it's about the founding of Atlantic City and the chaos of the Grey Gang here. After watching it for a long time, it became boring, so Jiang Hai didn't finish watching it. When Atlantic City was founded, it was just like Las Vegas. It was a normal city and had nothing to do with the gambling city. But in 1931, Las Vegas became a gambling city in order to revive the economy. After seeing the benefits of Las Vegas, Atlantic City also became a gambling city in the 1970s. But unlike Las Vegas, it's in the Southwest, and this place is under New York. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Walton also said to Jiang Hai. It's nothing more than that after the founding of Las Vegas, the government is in charge, and after the founding of the Atlantic Empire, the real boss is the Grey Gang. What rules can the Grey Gang have? They rob people and customers everywhere. If they win money, they don't let others go. If they lose money, they let others go. This is the Grey Gang. It's precisely because of this that Atlantic City was very popular in the beginning, but in the 1980s, when airplanes became a common means of transportation, most rich people would rather go to Las Vegas than come here to play. When the tax revenue was reduced, the government reacted and began to vigorously attack the Grey Gang. Now, there are only a few rats in the entire Atlantic City. The Grey Gang was exterminated, even the foreign gangs, such as South U Gang, MO Gang, Latin American Gang, they were all wiped out. But the foundation built over the years is not easy for others to have confidence in. It's just like when the United States was reforming and opening up, there was a large-scale pollution of land and water, but that was many years ago. The land and rivers in the United States were already very clean, and some places even reached the standard of drinking water. But back then, the United States government said not to catch fish in the river to eat it. Everyone in the United States still abides by that. Otherwise, Asian carp wouldn't be as rampant as it is now, because they don't dare to eat it. It's the same in Atlantic City. As the saying goes, once bitten, twice shy. The flow of people in Atlantic City is still lukewarm. There are many casinos, but more of them are closed than open. The total population of Atlantic City is only 50,000 people. It's hard to imagine that there are less than 50,000 people in a city. However, this was a place that many rich people liked to live in. This was because the environment here was very good. Plus, there weren't even any rats here, and the gray gang was even rarer. Living here was very safe. So there are many rich people living here. Along the way, Jiang Hai listened to Prawalton's introduction. He didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The population of the United States isn't very small. There are about 300 million people, but compared to Huaxia, it's really too vast and sparsely populated. Of course, the most sparsely populated place is Canada, where there aren't many people at all. Along the way, the sea breeze blew as they looked at the slightly gorgeous city. Jiang Hai and Prawalton arrived at their destination, the Caesar Palace Hotel. In fact, the hotel's reputation is much bigger than it actually is. Before the MGM Grand Hotel was built, it had always been the world's largest casino. The headquarters was in Las Vegas, and there was a branch in Atlantic City. Of course, the current Caesar Palace is also a first-class casino in the world, but it's not as famous. After all, there are many rich people who are purely in pursuit of greatness. Caesar Palace is far from it. For example, Golden Sand, Cloud Top, Venetian, Monte Carlo, etc. These are all big casinos. Their guests, their entertainment equipment, and their standards were not inferior to Caesar's. However, Caesar had a unique advantage, which was that it was the first choice for all the indoor gambling matches. The most famous one is boxing, and in addition to boxing, the UFC that Jiang Hai wants to watch this time is also the same. After parking the car in the underground parking lot of Caesar Palace, Jiang Hai walked into the casino with Prawalton. When they walked in, the two security guards hesitated for a moment, but they didn't say anything. Because in their view, Jiang Hai is definitely not dressed properly. After all, Jiang Hai likes to wear sportswear and outdoors. Over here, even if you didn't wear a suit, you would at least wear a casual suit. You would wear a shirt on the inside and a suit on the outside. Even if you didn't wear a tie, you could still wear a collar and leather shoes. To Westerners, this would be considered a set of formal attire. However, Jiang Hai is so casual, it really doesn't meet the standards of a guest, which makes the two security guards a little hesitant. The reason why they didn't stop Jiang Hai is because they know that Jiang Hai's car is worth millions of dollars, and Jiang Hai's watch is worth millions of dollars. These two alone are enough to blind their eyes. So they didn't say anything, and just watched Jiang Hai and the others go in. In the United States, the rich are the boss, and there are not so many principals to speak of. When Jiang Hai and Prawalton walked into the casino, the situation inside really made Jiang Hai's eyes light up. The casino in front of him is divided into 3 parts, 2 large parts, and a small part. The small part is for exchanging chips. The medium part is mainly for playing slot machines. Of course, slot machines are not only one kind of machine, there are many kinds of machines, just like the game halls in China, but unfortunately, there is no catch fish. Jiang Hai has no idea how to play the 777 slot machine. The other part is the gambling table. On the gambling table here, the most played is blackjack, in addition to 5-card stud, asterisk 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 asterisk, baccarat, and so on. According to the bottom of the chips, the color of the table is different. Behind each table is a beautiful woman who acts as a dealer. Of course, in addition, there are many waiters and security guards patrolling here. Although it is only around 2:00 in the afternoon, Jiang Hai and Prawalton came over after having lunch at her home. However, there are already a lot of people here. In addition, there is a special living room here. The UFC fight will start there, but now it is closed. According to the painting on the wall of the casino, the space can seat 18,000 people. It is almost the same size as an NBA stadium. It is said that the one in Las Vegas is bigger. In addition, there are many small private rooms, which are left for the rich to play by themselves. After Jiang Hai arrived here, he looked around. Although he wanted to try his luck, Jiang Hai did not forget his purpose of coming here. He took out his mobile phone and called Du Feimin. The phone was picked up after a few rings, and then Du Feimin's voice came from the phone. It was still so forthright and fake. "Hi, Jiang, you finally called me. Are you coming over?" Looking at the person displayed on the phone, Du Feimin said enthusiastically. Hearing Du Feimin's enthusiastic voice on the phone, Walton was stunned. Jiang Hai said that he is not very familiar with him, but now listening to his voice, it does not sound like they are not familiar with each other. "I'm already at the casino, where are you?" Shrugging at Walton, Jiang Hai said that he has no other choice. Then he asked Du Feimin on the phone. "This guy has always been unreliable." "Me? I'm fighting, do you want to come over and join me?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin shouted excitedly. "Fight? Forget it." Glancing at Walton beside him, Jiang Hai thought that the fight, so it is better for him not to get involved. Walton on his side is very difficult to deal with. "That's a pity, I will ask my people to send you the tickets. You can play first. The fight starts at 7:00, your seat is next to mine. We will talk when we meet." Hearing that Jiang Hai is not interested in his fight, Du Feimin sighed helplessly, then told Jiang Hai to play by himself. In fact, the fight he is talking about is not the same as what Jiang Hai said. He is gambling, but even so, Jiang Hai is not willing to watch him gamble. If he wants to play, he can play here by himself. It is better for him not to get involved in the fights of the rich. After all, he is not really rich. Okay. After talking to Du Feimin, Jiang Hai also hung up the phone. Then, he talked to Walton, and the two went to the side to exchange $200,000 in chips, ready to go their separate ways to play. Walton lives in Atlantic City, and she is also a descendant of a big family, so she is very familiar with these kinds of games. Whether it is for her or for Jiang Hai, the $100,000 is just pocket money. So, after each of them took the $100,000, the two of them went their own ways to play. Jiang Hai also gave it a try, but soon it was proven that he was not the child of the plane of existence or anything like that. The plot of killing everyone in the casino, making money, stepping on people, and picking up girls in the novel is not there at all. He really does not know how to play. Chapter 5:15. The dealer has 18 points. "Sir, I'm sorry, you won." Looking at the J, Q, and 5 in his hand, Jiang Hai opened his mouth, but when he heard what the beautiful dealer said, he shook his head helplessly. Novels are really deceiving. What a scam. Watching the beautiful woman in front of him take away the $5,000 worth of chips on his table, Jiang Hai sighed and put in another $2,000. It seemed that he was going to die here. Actually, it wasn't a matter of whether he was going to die or not, but that this was the only game he knew how to play here. The way to win was the same for card stud and card stud. The biggest was a straight flush, followed by an iron stud, which was 4 of the same kind, followed by a calabash, which was a triple pair, followed by a straight, a flush, a 3 of a kind, 2 of a kind, and a scatter. Those who had watched Hong Kong gambling movies will not be unfamiliar with this method. But the problem now was that the movies were all lies. Where did this straight flush come from? Bullsh*T, isn't it? Jiang Hai played 3 rounds. The biggest round was a 3 of a kind, but that was it. His opponent beat him with a small flush. If he played Texas, his hand would be even bigger, because there were 2 matching cards. Almost every hand had a flush, a straight, and even a calabash was very common. But it was obvious that Jiang Hai wasn't that lucky. After losing more than $30,000 on that table, Jiang Hai ran away dejectedly. Fortunately, he was only here to play and broaden his horizons. He wasn't going to stick his head in here. After losing $100,000, it was unlikely that he would come back again. As for Baccarat, he just stood there and watched. Then, when he realized that he didn't even understand the rules, he endured it. Then, he played blackjack, which was the only game he understood. Unfortunately, he still lost more than he won. What was the dealer's greatest skill? Protection. This was because she wasn't specifically targeting Jiang Hai. As long as she calculated that she could win this game, then she would stop. If she calculated that she couldn't win, then she would add more. This was also the reason why she didn't want to lose money as a banker. Jiang Hai was one of those losers. He only had $20,000 left of his $100,000. Mr. Jiang Hai, so you're here. I've been looking for you for a long time. Just as Jiang Hai was waiting for the cards to be dealt, a big man from the Middle East came over and looked at Jiang Hai respectfully. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but look at him with some surprise. I'm Dofayman Weha Muhammad. Oh, I know. You're one of his men, right? Hearing that he was going to introduce himself and say Dofayman's full name, Jiang Hai immediately waved his hand to stop him. What a joke, who would listen to this? Hearing Jiang Hai's interruption, the man nodded and respectfully handed over an envelope. This is the admission ticket that Mr. Dofayman prepared for you. There are 2 in total. We know that you came with a female companion. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man said with a smile. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai couldn't help but nod. It would be strange if Dofayman didn't know that he came with a female companion. He didn't believe that the people in this hotel would monitor him here. Okay, I got it. By the way, how long will it take for Dofayman to finish? He's in good health. He's been fighting for so long. Is he still fighting? Taking the envelope, Jiang Hai hesitated for a moment and asked the man. It mainly depends on the wishes of the other people and the financial situation of the other people. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man couldn't help but be stunned for a moment. Then, he respectfully said to Jiang Hai. Hearing what he said, Jiang Hai was a little puzzled. Isn't he? Looking at the man, Jiang Hai moved his crotch, then raised his eyebrows and said to him. Oh, of course not. They are gambling in the VIP room. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the man from the Middle East said with a black face. If an ordinary person dared to say that to Dofayman, he might have directly punched him. One must know that Dofayman was a member of Dubai's royal family. He wasn't someone to be trifled with. As his subordinates, they understood the principle of death when their master was humiliated. However, they knew that Jiang Hai was their lord's friend. Therefore, they could only swallow their anger. Oh. They are gambling. Take me there to have a look. Jiang Hai now had the mentality of a tourist. After learning that Dofayman was not there to do that thing, Jiang Hai also became interested. Okay, please come this way. The waiter knew that the relationship between Jiang Hai and Dofayman was very close. Most importantly, Dofayman had just invited Jiang Hai to watch his gambling, so he didn't mind letting Jiang Hai go again. Wait a minute, I'll go find my female companion. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai smiled, then glanced at the 2 cards in front of him, a 4 and an 8, adding up to 12 points. He definitely couldn't win with such cards, so he knocked on the table. With this knock, the dealer on the opposite side also took advantage of the opportunity to deal a card. When he saw Old K's ugly face, he knew that it was over again. Then he shook his head and stood up. He glanced around and saw Prawalton at a German gambling table in the distance. He pulled this person to Prawalton's side. After arriving here, Jiang Hai couldn't help but secretly click his tongue. He really didn't see that Prawalton was actually a master. Jiang Hai's side was about to lose everything, but her side didn't fall but rose instead. Looking at the chips, in addition to the initial 100,000, she seemed to have won another 100,000. Seeing her return to her cold queen image after leaving Jiang Hai couldn't help but laugh. Because he felt that the money she won wasn't just because of her skills. Because at this moment, many men would unintentionally glance at her when they were looking at their cards. There was no other way, such a cold and noble woman, no man would dislike her. And Pra Walton was also sitting there, a pair of disdainful eyes glancing at the gambling table in front of her. When she looked at these men, she couldn't help but snort. What a group of disgusting guys. At this moment, the last card had appeared. Looking at the 5 cards on the table and the 2 in her hand, Pra Walton casually threw out $5,000 in chips. It seemed that she was quite confident in this round. Hee, $5,000, it's not a small amount, are you sure? Seeing her throw out $5,000, there were a total of 8 people on the table. At this time, 5 of them had already closed their cards, leaving only Pra Walton, a middle-aged man who looked like a refined scum, and an old man who looked like a nouveau riche. At this time, the middle-aged man said with a smile. If you don't follow, then close your cards. Hearing his words, Pra Walton said indifferently. Close your cards? Oh no, I'm just telling you, you're going to lose money like this, beauty. Hearing Pra Walton's words, the man also threw out $5,000 with a smile. The confident look on his face was really disgusting. Last round, raise. At this moment, the dealer glanced at the 3 people who were still following and said indifferently. 10,000, open your cards. Hearing this, Pra Walton directly threw out $10,000 in chips again, and then said indifferently. The old man thought for a moment and closed his cards. In his opinion, these cards were not worth so much. Only the middle-aged man was still looking at Pra Walton in front of him with a lustful gaze. $10,000, you're really generous. I'll follow this 10,000, but the upper limit of this table is only $10,000. It's not interesting. Why don't we bet outside? Looking at Pra Walton, the man said with a smile. Huh? Looking at his proposal, Pra Walton couldn't help but raise his head and look at him. What does this guy mean? We'll bet $100,000 for this round. If you win, the $100,000 is yours. But if you lose, do me the honor of having a meal with us. Many people couldn't help but gasp when they heard what the man said. $100,000 in exchange for a meal? Many women felt a little excited when they looked at this guy who looked like a gentleman. He was handsome, had a good temperament, and most importantly, was rich and domineering. He was really the perfect partner. Not interested. But unfortunately, he was facing Pra Walton. Now, except for Jiang Hai, she was still full of hostility to other men, so after a disdainful snort, she pushed the cards forward and motioned for the dealer to open. As for the man, after seeing Pra Walton's appearance, he couldn't help but feel a little embarrassed, but this embarrassment only lasted for a moment, and then his face showed more and more interest in Pra Walton. At this time, the dealer also opened the cards of the 2. Pra Walton's luck was not very good in this game. Although she got a gourd, the other party's cards were a bit harder, it was a straight flush. More than $20,000 on the table had changed owners in an instant. Seeing this scene, the man couldn't help but sigh. If Pra Walton agreed to bet with him just now, would it mean that he might be able to get close to the beauty? But he didn't care, he always believed that there was no girl in the world that he couldn't flirt with. A cold beauty like Pra Walton was nothing more than a matter of time, it was that simple. Lost? But at this time, a man's stinky hand suddenly put on the shoulder of the goddess in his heart, and then an Asian face appeared beside his goddess. Seeing this scene, the man's index finger couldn't help but twitch. I won, look. What made him even more unbearable was the attitude of his goddess. When she saw this man, the goddess who had always been cold suddenly smiled like a silly sweet girl, and showed off her victory like a little girl. Seeing this scene, the guy couldn't help but feel a fire burning in his heart. Too hateful. Chapter 5:16. Wow, that's amazing. At this time, only Jiang Hai could be tired of Prawalton. And the most important thing is that in Prawalton's heart, the only man who can be tired of is Jiang Hai. That's right, you don't know who I am. Hearing Jiang Hai's praise, Prawalton said with a smile as if she had eaten honey. Looking at her charming smile and beautiful eyes, the men who originally had a lot of improper thoughts about Prawalton heard the sound of their hearts breaking at this time, especially the middle-aged man opposite them. Tsk, I really don't have any talent in this game. I only have 10,000 left of my 100,000. Smacking his lips, Jiang Hai said with a smile, and then took out his only remaining chip. If you want to play, take it. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton also gave her chip to Jiang Hai. Shao by face, king of soft rice. Seeing Prawalton's action, the men here secretly scolded Jiang Hai in their hearts. Forget it, I won't play. This is Du Feimin's man. He said that Du Feimin is gambling in the VIP box. I'm going to take a look. Do you want to come? Looking at Prawalton, Jiang Hai asked her. When they heard Jiang Hai's words, many people's hearts jumped. The VIP box is not a place where just anyone can enter. Although looking at Jiang Hai's nondescript appearance, he doesn't seem to be very rich. But he can go to the VIP box, which shocked the people next to him, and many of the resentful eyes at that time disappeared. Even the middle-aged man sitting opposite Prawalton also restrained his gaze. At least before he knew who Jiang Hai was, he didn't dare to easily offend Jiang Hai. Okay. But Jiang Hai and Prawalton ignored these gazes. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Prawalton also smiled, and then motioned to the dealer to change the money. The dealer quickly changed a check for $170,000 and handed it to her, but Jiang Hai didn't change his $10,000 chip. According to him, he wanted to take it back as a souvenir. The two of them left the table and followed Du Feimin's man to the VIP room. Looking at the backs of Jiang Hai and Prawalton, the people at the table continued to play while whispering, because they didn't know who Jiang Hai and Prawalton were, although Prawalton had been here before. But who is she? Would the little princess of the Walmart play in the lobby? So 95% of the time when she came here, she would go to the private room to play while talking about business. Sometimes, she would play outside to accompany her new girlfriend. She would play a few rounds in a very low-key way, and then leave. It was her first time playing like today. So it was normal for the person in charge of Caesar Palace to know her, but almost none of these individual guests knew her. No matter how the people outside talked about the two, they had already walked out of the lobby and went to the nearby private room area. The private room here was much stricter than the lobby. Not only did they have to go through the metal detector door like going through security, but there would also be people checking their packages. Fortunately, Jiang Hai was used to being checked in China. Prawalton didn't bring anything today except her mobile phone. After all, she was with Jiang Hai. She knew that Jiang Hai was also a rich man. It would be troublesome to go out with him with a wallet. She didn't bring her handbag either. For her, she only needed to put on makeup. There was no need to touch up her makeup. After the two passed through the security gate, Du Feimin's people took them to the outside of a lobby. After knocking on the door and getting permission, the person opened the door. Jiang Hai followed him in. As soon as they walked in, Jiang Hai saw a huge gambling table in the splendidly decorated room. In addition to the dealer, there were 4 other people sitting at the gambling table. A white man, a black man, an Asian man, and Jiang Hai's friend Du Feimin. At this time, the chips in front of these people made Jiang Hai somewhat surprised. At the tables outside, there were chips of all sizes, with the smallest being $1. However, at the table where Jiang Hai and Prawalton were gambling, the minimum bet was $500, which meant that the smallest chip was $500. The smallest chip on the table for these people gambling here was 100,000. Fine, for the rich, this really wasn't a lot. Everyone had 1,000 chips worth $100,000 in front of them, which added up to $100 million per person. It was truly terrifying to be able to make $100 million just by playing cards. it wasn't that Jiang Hai didn't have $100 million, but he would have to be crazy to spend $100 million here. Hey, Jiang, you're finally here. Do you want to add a corner? Seeing Jiang Hai walk in with Prawalton, Du Feynman was stunned for a moment, then nodded at Prawalton before speaking enthusiastically to Jiang Hai. It seemed that he also knew Prawalton, which was understandable. Basically, there was no upper-class person in America who didn't know Prawalton. However, this little princess of the Walton family, who was now at the helm of Sam's Club, wasn't so easy to get along with. Her reputation wasn't very good. Of course, this so-called reputation wasn't referring to her private life. It was referring to the way she conducted herself. Her personality was quite strange, but she was extraordinarily capable. Coupled with the support of the Walton family, the world's largest business family, she only needed to show her ability. She didn't need to make any concessions or anything like that, and she could do quite well. As for her, many second-generation heirs and young masters had been warned by their families not to provoke her. Therefore, when Du Feynman saw her now, if she didn't take the initiative to express their relationship, then he wouldn't take the initiative to talk to her. Forget it, my money isn't used to waste. I really don't have any thoughts about the bet. Hearing Du Feynman's words, Jiang Hai shook his head. He was telling the truth. If he lost 90,000 yuan from 100,000 yuan, then he wouldn't be too distressed. However, if he lost 90,000 yuan from 100 million yuan, then he probably wouldn't be able to sleep for several nights. He would have to find a sunken ship to get it back up. However, with the blueprints he bought last time, he basically got all the ships that should be sunken. The remaining ships, if not small ships, were only worth 18 million yuan. Jiang Hai wasn't interested in them. They were just ships that sunk in awkward positions. For example, in the Cuban waters, or in the Colombian waters. If Jiang Hai wanted to go to these places, how could he guarantee his safety? Therefore, in the current situation where there wasn't much night grass, Jiang Hai had better eat it sparingly. Oh, that's a pity. You know, this is a very fun game. You can do whatever you want. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman smiled, then sat back in his seat and began to play. Jiang Hai and Prawalton also sat behind him, looking at his cards. Seeing Prawalton sit down, the black man and the white man took the initiative to nod to Prawalton, but they also didn't speak. It was obvious that these two people also knew Prawalton. However, when the Asian man saw Jiang Hai and Prawalton, his expression was a little different. When he saw Jiang Hai, the main expression in his eyes was disdain and ridicule, but when he looked at Prawalton, his eyes flashed with a hint of amazement. It was obvious that he didn't know Jiang Hai or Prawalton. Even after Prawalton sat down, his eyes looked straight at Prawalton with a wretched face. Hey, kid, do you want to play cards or watch something? Looking at his appearance, the four people sitting there frowned. Only Prawalton's face didn't have any other expression, but this made Jiang Hai a little unhappy, but he didn't need to speak because the black man over there had already spoken. What a joke, offending the people of the Walmart group. Can they still play? Play cards. Hearing what the black man said, the kid smiled a little awkwardly and then looked at the card table. It's your turn, what are you playing? At this time, the white man also tapped the table gently and said disdainfully. Hearing his words, the Asian kid's face flashed a trace of anger, but then he remembered that this was the United States, not his territory, so he forced himself to suppress it, and then he threw 10 chips with a smile, which was $1 million. While throwing, he also looked at Prawalton. It was obvious that he really liked Prawalton. Seeing that he had already thrown the money, the others didn't say anything. They didn't care about $1 million. After throwing the money, the dealer continued to put the cards. This time, they were also playing a card game. Indeed, after this kind of game appeared, it was much more complicated. It was more attractive than the traditional 5-card stud. Nowadays, people who gambled on big cards preferred to play this way. The four people seemed to have a tacit understanding. Each card was worth $1 million. Soon, 3 rounds were over, 2 cards were dealt in the first round, 3 cards were shown in the second round, and 1 more card was added in the last round. 4 cards appeared on the table. Basically, it was clear whether the cards in everyone's hands could be formed. Looking at the cards on the table, Du Feynman's cards were a little scattered. But he could put together the last card to see if it was a club. In that case, he could try for a flush. But even a flush wasn't a big deal in a card game, so after hesitating for a moment, he put down the card. And when he put down the card, the Asian kid over there also laughed and said, Chapter 5:17. What's wrong? The Middle Eastern nouveau riche can also be scared? Looking at Du Feynman, the Asian guy couldn't help but laugh. I'm just here to have fun. My money doesn't grow on trees. Shrugging, Du Feynman didn't care about this kind of provocation. Of course, the latter sentence was taught to him by Jiang Hai. When he asked Jiang Hai to invest in Dubai, Jiang Hai often said this. Hearing his words, the Asian guy also laughed, then took out 10 million and threw it into the pool. Seeing him do this, the white guy also put down his cards, and only the black guy followed. When the last card was revealed, the Asian guy's face was even more proud. Holding 2 cards, he looked at the black guy in front of him with a smile. Of course, he kept looking at Prawalton from the corner of his eyes. In his opinion, there was no woman who didn't love money. He naturally had his reasons for being so rich. There are only 2 of us left. How about 20 million for a small round? Seeing him being so rich, the black guy over there smiled and took out 20 million and threw it on the table. The Asian guy also took out 20 million and threw it on the table. Then, the cards were revealed. The Asian guy's cards were indeed not small. On the cards, there was an ace, 2 jacks, and 2 kings. This guy had a jack and a king in his hand, which meant that no matter which one he used, it would be a king captive, gourd. Generally speaking, such a big card was enough to win, so when he showed his cards, he already smiled and signaled the dealer to give him the money. However, when the dealer showed the black guy's cards, his original smile instantly froze. The black guy's cards were very simple, a pair of jacks and a pair of aces. Although the top card of the ace card was not as good as his, this card was better than his king card. Seeing this scene, the Asian guy's face instantly turned green. Obviously, more than $30 million was not as easy as he said. He was also distressed to lose it just like that. The money is mine. The black man grinned, revealing a mouthful of white teeth. After glancing at the Asian with contempt, he smiled and motioned for the dealer to bring the money to him. In an instant, the money in front of him was much more than the other 3. Wow, you guys are playing big. 30 million in one go. 100 million won't last long. Seeing that the black man directly received tens of millions, Jiang Hai couldn't help but be a little stunned. These people are really ruthless. My assets will probably become negative after playing with them for a night. Fortunately, I'm not addicted to this thing, or else it would be troublesome. It wasn't this big before you came. The biggest one was only 3 million. However, after hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman couldn't help but smile and talk to him. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also glanced at the Asian kid. Needless to say, this guy's purpose was Prawalton. Unfortunately, this round of 13 was not successful enough. Not only did he not get the girl, but he also lost more than 30 million. His face was green with fright. Cough, the one who won first is paper. Let's continue. Picking up the wine glass next to him and taking a big gulp, the kid pretended to be calm and said to the crowd. Then, he continued to throw a chip of 100,000, but his eyes didn't dare to look at Prawalton so presumptuously. It seemed that the failure of the 13 just now still had some impact on him. The most important thing was that more than 30 million, his heart ached. Who are these people? Looking at the Asian, Jiang Hai whispered to Du Feynman. He is the third largest individual shareholder of Google and Google. He has some influence in the upper class of the United States, but he is a playboy and has no real power. He has a good relationship with everyone. The black man is Ofatrio Campos. He was originally a gray man in New York, but he stopped more than 10 years ago and opened a security company. Later, he invested in Blackwater International and is now the second largest shareholder of Blackwater International. His money may be the least among all the people here, but he is the one you can't provoke. Fortunately, this person is very well behaved and low-key. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman also introduced the three people here to Jiang Hai in a low voice, but he first introduced the white man and the black man. When Jiang Hai heard that the black man was actually a gray man, he couldn't help but frown and put a label on him that he couldn't be friends with. As for the Asian, he is a Korean. According to their country's name, he is called Li Jihao. He is a member of the Samsung Financial Group. The current leader of the Samsung Financial Group is his father. Du Feynman looked at the Asian and said with a smile. Among these people, when he introduced this person, he used the least words. It could be seen that Du Feynman didn't think highly of him. Indeed, there was a big gap between the rich people in the East and the rich people in the West. In the West, such as the United States, when your money reached a certain level, your existence would affect the political situation of the country. For example, Bill Gates. No American president would go against him. Sometimes, his words were more effective than the American president's. This was his power. But in the East, no matter if it was Korea, Japan, or Huaxia, the rich people were just substitutes in front of the government. The country needs you to have money and your own ability. Only then can you be qualified to be rich. This was the biggest difference between a gold-based society and an official-based society. Even in China, people were shouting about how capable they were and how much money they had. But as long as the imperial court gave the order, even the most powerful person would have to kneel down. This was similar to the Soviet Union. In the past, in order to develop Soviet Russia, the Soviet government had created a lot of oligarchs. But now, Soviet Russia's financial situation had stabilized, and these oligarchs became the public enemy. This was the official definition of the imperial court and Soviet Russia. So, Soviet Russia took action against these oligarchs. Once these oligarchs fell, the country would take back their money, factories, and power. So, in Huaxia and Soviet Russia, having money was useless. Power was the most important thing. Otherwise, even a village chief could kill you like a pig. Although Japan and Korea were not like Huaxia, their situation was not good. At least, they were not as arrogant as the rich people in the US. To the Koreans, the young master of the Samsung conglomerate was a big name. But to Du Feynman and the others, it was just a small matter. They didn't need to be on good terms with him for what they wanted to do. He was only here to accompany the guests. Of course, Li Jihao did not think so. At this moment, he did not look like a guest. Instead, he looked like the main character. Of course, if it was in the US, the most powerful person at the table was Walton, who was beside Jiang Hai. After all, this guy represented Walmart Group, the world's #1 group. It was not as simple as just saying. Under the attention of Jiang Hai and the rest, Li Jihao was a far cry from these old foxes in front of them. Originally, these old foxes did not care if they lost or won 2 or 3 million. They treated it as a way to pass time and accompany them to play. But now, since this guy was looking for death, they could not blame them. In the third round where Jiang Hai and the rest were sitting, this guy lost again. This time, he lost more than 20 million. This time, the 100 million in front of him was only left with 40 million. It was less than 50 million. His face was even more purple. In the 7th round, he lost again. This time, he was only left with 30 million. Looking at his reddened eyes, Jiang Hai could not help but feel a little funny. This might be a sign of addiction. In the 11th round, the white man casually said a few words to provoke him. After that, he bet the rest of his money. The result was self-evident. If they were not sure of winning, why would these old foxes be so fierce? At the moment when the cards were revealed, this guy's face was also pale. He was indeed the eldest son of Samsung and the only son of the current head of Samsung. But since he was born in 1990, he was 2 years younger than Jiang Hai. With such a big family like Samsung, the internal strife within the family was naturally difficult to resolve. There were plenty of people eyeing their positions. And with his family's style, it was naturally impossible for them to be like some idiot families who raised their children to be hedonistic or second-generation heirs. But which young man was not arrogant? Especially since he could do whatever he wanted in South Korea. But he also knew that although this $100 million was nothing to his family, if he lost it all, he would not be able to avoid a scolding. In a situation like this where people were afraid of losing, they would want to win back. And winning back also required capital, so his eyes instantly turned red and he was ready to take out another 100 million. But just as he was about to ask the dealer to give him the money, a person behind him who looked like a bodyguard patted him on the shoulder and said a few words in his ear. Hearing this person's words, the redness in his eyes gradually receded. Forget it, I'm not lucky today. I'll treat this 100 million as entertainment for you. I'm leaving. After slamming the table, Li Zhihao stood up and was about to walk out with a relaxed expression. But after just a few steps, he suddenly stopped and walked to Pra Walton, who was still sitting there. I think you're quite bored sitting here. Why don't we go downstairs for a drink? Looking at Pra Walton, Li Zhihao chuckled, then elegantly made a gesture of invitation and looked at Pra Walton. But unfortunately, Pra Walton would not spoil him and said coldly, I advise you to go see an ophthalmologist. I have a male companion. Oh, I don't think your male companion will mind. Hearing her words, Li Zhihao smiled disdainfully, glanced at Jiang Hai next to him, and said contemptuously. He heard Du Feimin's introduction just now. Perhaps the name of Samsung could not shock those black and white people in the United States, but it was not a problem to shock an Asian face. Chapter 518. Oh. Are you a fart that I let out? You know my thoughts so well. But just as he was feeling smug, a mocking voice suddenly came from the side and entered his ears. Needless to say, the person who spoke was Jiang Hai. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin, as well as the other 2 Americans, laughed. They had to admit that Jiang Hai's words were quite lethal. Even Pra Walton couldn't help but laugh. Kid, you're quite arrogant. You don't pay attention to what you say. Aren't you afraid of dying outside? Hearing Jiang Hai's words and the laughing faces of the people around him, the original smile on Li Zhihao's face disappeared in an instant. He stood up again and narrowed his eyes as he looked at Jiang Hai. For him, Du Feimin, the white man, and the black man, he didn't dare to provoke him. A nameless Asian dared to be so arrogant and even dared to insult him. You're courting death. Kid, to my friend. Hearing his almost blatant threat, Jiang Hai didn't say anything, but Du Feimin had already stood up. For a Middle Eastern tycoon like him, what he cared about the most was his face. This guy threatened Jiang Hai. Wasn't that making him lose face? Was there anyone at the table who didn't know that Jiang Hai was his friend? But before he could finish his words, Jiang Hai had already patted him on the shoulder, then looked at him playfully, with a look of contempt on his face. He said to him, Oh? Are you threatening me? That depends on what you think. Hearing Jiang Hai's direct retort, Li Zhihao's supercilious character, which he had cultivated in South Korea, made him take a step forward and look at Jiang Hai with tit for tat. He, Li Zhihao, wasn't someone that any Tom, Dick, or Harry could bully. However, he thought that he wasn't someone that others could bully, but sorry, Jiang Hai wasn't someone that others could bully either. Especially since they dared to threaten him in front of him. Jiang Hai had no intention of indulging them. Oh, if that's the case, I've fought with your mother before. Although your mother's skills are good, her plastic surgery was too much. Although I only spent one night with her, I'm still someone who has been through her front door and back door. When you see me, shouldn't you call me daddy or something like that? Crossing his legs, Jiang Hai raised his head and looked at Li Zhihao in front of him. Jiang Hai said slowly with disdain. You bastard, what did you say? Hearing that Jiang Hai dared to insult his mother in such a blatant manner, Li Zhihao could no longer tolerate it. Originally, he was like a crown prince in South Korea. He didn't provoke others. Since when did someone dare to point at his nose and say such things in front of him? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, the expressions of the three people at the table changed. The black man and the white man looked at Jiang Hai with some worry. As for Du Feimin, he was just watching the fun. With his friendship with Jiang Hai, in addition to the relationship between Jiang Hai and the imperial court, this time, it was Jiang Hai who pulled the strings and built the bridge, and Jiang Hai's capital. In South Korea, Jiang Hai would be dead for sure. However, this was the United States. Even if he was given 10 guts, he wouldn't dare to do anything to Jiang Hai. Moreover, Jiang Hai had Pra Walton by his side. Do I need to repeat what I said again? Little bastard. Seeing that Li Zhihao was about to go crazy, Jiang Hai still said disdainfully. Hearing that Jiang Hai still dared to say such things, Li Zhihao also went crazy. He went up and punched Jiang Hai's face. With this punch, everyone in the room, except for Jiang Hai, stood up, especially Pra Walton. He dared to hit Jiang Hai in front of her. She thought that this guy didn't want to stay in the United States anymore. However, before she said anything, Jiang Hai waved his hand and stopped him. He touched his cheek. What a joke. His physical fitness was 4 times that of an ordinary person. Li Zhihao's punch was almost like scratching an itch. Hey, you hit me? Touching his face, Jiang Hai stood up. With a height of more than 1.9 meters, he looked at Li Zhihao condescendingly, but his eyes were full of ridicule. Seeing that Jiang Hai still dared to be so arrogant, Li Zhihao also stared back. I not only dare to hit you, I also dare to kill. Looking at Jiang Hai, he said word by word, but unfortunately, before he finished speaking, Jiang Hai instantly backhanded him. With a loud bang, a backhand slap heavily on his cheek. After Li Zhihao was slapped 720 degrees in the air, he fell heavily to the ground. At the moment of landing, before his brain could react, he spat out a mouthful of blood. Don't get me wrong, this was not an internal injury. Jiang Hai just had a strong physical fitness. He didn't know how to use force to hit. His slap directly knocked out a few of this guy's big teeth. The white fragments that were spat out with the blood were these teeth. Looking at Li Zhihao, who was lying on the ground and completely stunned, Jiang Hai would not let him go easily. He pulled the corner of his mouth and quickly walked over, but Li Zhihao didn't come alone. He still had 3 bodyguards. When they saw the conflict between Li Zhihao and Jiang Hai, they were already on guard. When Li Zhihao hit Jiang Hai, they would definitely not help. If they saw that Jiang Hai had any intention of fighting back, it would be time for them to take action. Unfortunately, Jiang Hai moved too fast. They didn't see what was going on at all, and Li Zhihao was already lying on the ground. Seeing that Jiang Hai was still not going to let Li Zhihao go, these people, under the command of a middle-aged man, instantly rushed towards Jiang Hai. However, they just took a step and forced themselves to stop there. Let's see who dares to move. The one who spoke was Du Feimin, because at this time, the bodyguards behind Du Feimin instantly pulled out their guns. It was originally a very simple thing for bodyguards to carry guns, but in the VIP room of Caesar Palace, bodyguards were not allowed to carry guns. This was the most basic rule, but there were always exceptions. Rules were created to be broken. Du Feimin was not an ordinary Middle Eastern local tyrant. He was the royal family of Dubai, and he had the right to not trust the people in Caesar Palace. If he lost a hair here, it would easily cause a diplomatic dispute. All Americans knew what kind of people the United States was. If there was a dispute between Caesar Palace and the royal family of Dubai, the higher-ups would probably give up on them. They didn't even need to hold a meeting. Therefore, if these royal families and princes came here to play, they would use their own bodyguards, and they were also allowed to carry guns. Of course, if something happened, these royal families and princes would pay for it themselves. Although they knew that Du Feynman was unlikely to shoot, these bodyguards couldn't afford to gamble. What if he shot? They didn't dare to kill Li Zhihao, but if they killed them, although there would be trouble, it shouldn't be difficult to settle. There was no shortage of heroes in this world, but they really didn't think that they would be so stupid to rush up and be killed. At this time, Jiang Hai had already walked to Li Zhihao's side and bent down to look at him on the ground. At this time, Li Zhihao shook his head and was more or less awake. When he raised his head and saw Jiang Hai, a trace of fear flashed in his eyes, followed by great resentment. He couldn't help but spit a mouthful of bloody phlegm on the ground. Looking at Jiang Hai, this guy was still angry and shouted loudly, "Let me tell you, if you dare to hit me, you're dead. You're declaring war on the Samsung Lee family of South Korea. You're destined to die a horrible death." However, what greeted him was Jiang Hai's smiling face. He continued as if he didn't hear him, "It seems that I have to go to South Korea when I have time. Now that I see you, I think of your mother again. That old fox's skills are really good. I heard that you have a younger sister. I haven't played with mother and daughter yet. When the time comes, I must give it a try. You beast." Hearing that Jiang Hai dared to insult his mother and sister in front of him, although his mother had divorced his father, he couldn't tolerate it. He forced himself to get up and swung his fist at Jiang Hai again. Jiang Hai was still punched in the mouth, but other than leaving a bloody mark, there was nothing else. Seeing this scene, Jiang Hai instantly raised his foot. Li Zhihao flew out and directly hit the wall behind him. This time, Jiang Hai couldn't play with him because he hit the wall too hard and directly fainted. However, Jiang Hai estimated that this kick of his would make Li Zhihao lie in the hospital for at least 10 days to half a month. "You dare to be so arrogant with this little skill? If it weren't for my soft-heartedness, you would have been beaten to death." He walked in front of Li Zhihao. As they said, Jiang Hai didn't dare to really kill him. If he killed him, it would be a diplomatic dispute. Although Jiang Hai deliberately let him make the first move and it was caught by the camera, this was considered a legitimate defense. However, if his defense was excessive and he accidentally killed someone, with his current ability, there would still be some trouble. "Hey, you are still soft-heartedness? Shameless, but I like your character very much. Let's go. Since the bet is not established, and you have no intention to get involved, then let's go eat. After eating, we will watch the competition. However, I feel that you should be stronger than those who fight in the UFC. TSK, really good." Seeing Jiang Hai stand up again and walk back, Du Feynman also smiled and signaled his bodyguards to put away their guns. The 3 bodyguards on the other side knew that they couldn't take revenge today. After glancing at Jiang Hai and Du Feynman, they quickly helped Li Zhihao and ran out of the private room. Although Jiang Hai had a sense of propriety, nothing must happen to the Samsung Crown Prince. After leaving Caesar's palace, everyone drove directly to the nearby hospital. As for Jiang Hai, he followed Du Feynman and Pra Walton to the restaurant here. The steak in the restaurant was also from Jiang Hai's manor, but they bought it from Pra Walton. The taste was still very good, especially for Du Feynman. It was really different every time he ate it. After dinner, Du Feynman, Jiang Hai, and Pra Walton went to the hall over there, ready to watch the UFC. Chapter 519. Is this fun to watch? Walking into the hall, after Jiang Hai and Du Feynman sat in the front row, Jiang Hai asked Du Feynman next to him. To be honest, this was the first time he came to watch this thing, so he really didn't understand it. If you like to watch ground fighting, then it's quite interesting. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman said with a smile. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai also looked at the hall in front of him. The hall they were in at this time was really not small. In addition to an octagonal iron cage in the middle, chairs and other things were placed not far from the periphery. There were many seats, but to be honest, there were a lot of people who came to watch. According to Du Feimin's introduction, this thing was just like boxing. If it wasn't a boxing championship or a focused battle, there wouldn't be many people who would buy tickets to watch it. He just happened to be in time, so he came to take a look. But even so, the ticket price for their first row was $1,600. Hearing this price, Jiang Hai couldn't help but secretly click his tongue. These people really dared to ask for money. They even dared to charge so much for a broken chair. In fact, Jiang Hai was not ignorant about the UFC. At least before he came, he deliberately looked it up. The full name of the UFC was Ultimate Fighting Championship. It was a new type of fighting competition. In Chinese, it is the Ultimate Fighting Championship. It is currently the world's top and largest professional MMA event. This fighting competition was established for a very short time. It was just established in 1993, and its headquarters were in Las Vegas. The concept of this fighting competition was inherited from Bruce Lee's fighting philosophy, but the Real Foundation was the representative family of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, the Gracie family. However, they were no longer the only big family. Among them, Muay Thai, karate, jiu-jitsu, boxing, wrestling, kickboxing, and other fighting events were also introduced into the competition. It could be said that this competition was the most unruly competition. Aside from head-butting, gouging eyes, pulling hair, stuffing hands or feet into the opponent's mouth, biting, kicking vitals, picking nostrils and ears, twisting fingers, striking vertically downward with the tip of the elbow, such as jumping up and striking the opponent's head with the tip of the elbow, attacking the spine and the back of the head, attacking the opponent's kidneys with the heel, grabbing the throat, grabbing the collarbone, and kicking the opponent's head when they are down. Other actions were allowed. Of course, taunting, spitting at the opponent, or insulting the opponent was not allowed. After all, this was graduation. The ones fighting were athletes, not ordinary hooligans. It could be said that they had the least number of rules among all the fighting competitions. However, because it was not an Olympic event, Huaxia itself did not place much importance on this kind of gambling competition. It was precisely because of this that Huaxia Kung Fu, which was known as one of the 4 major fighting techniques in the world, did not have much of a reputation on this stage. No Chinese were willing to fight, so there were not many Chinese people who came to watch. This thing was different from the WWE. Although the WWE was fake, there was one thing that was different. They had a storyline. Watching this thing was like watching a TV series, so it could attract a large number of fans in China. In the future, if they acted in TV series or movies, it would not be too sudden. After all, there was Dwayne Johnson. However, the UFC was different. This competition was very popular in Europe and the United States, but almost no one cared about this competition in China. However, as more and more people in Huaxia began to pay attention to the lethality of martial arts, some people entered this competition. The most famous one was Grassland Wolf Zhang Taiquan. His fighting strength was quite good, but because of the limitation of his body size, his results were not good. Therefore, although his record was not bad, it was not particularly good. However, with his participation, some people from Huaxia also joined this organization. According to Du Feimin's introduction, the people who competed here would not earn less than ordinary boxers. Of course, this referred to the people in the middle and lower levels. The top level of boxing was the world's largest gambling event. For people like Zhang Taiquan, the appearance fee for a competition was 100,000 euros, not including the prize money for winning. If they won all 4 fights in a year, their annual income would easily exceed 600,000 euros. If they fought in a focused fight or a belt defense fight, they would earn more, and there would also be a TV commission. However, if you were to compare yourself with Mayweather and the others, you would still be far behind them. After all, they could earn hundreds of millions of dollars just by fighting once a year. That was no joke. And that didn't even include the endorsements. What kind of nonsense was that? However, although these people had some fame in the UFC and some fans abroad, there were still too few people in China who knew them. Even some third-rate stars were more famous than them. Today's UFC fight was just an ordinary fight night. It wasn't a championship fight. While Jiang Hai and Du Feimeng were chatting, the match had unknowingly started. The first fight of the day was a light heavyweight fight. The two sides were a white man named Misa, and a black man named Daniel Jolin. This was the first time that Jiang Hai had seen such a fight. However, it was obvious that Daniel was better at boxing and standing attacks, while Misa was better at fighting on the ground. And that was the truth. After the first round began, the two of them started fighting. It was important to note that UFC fights were basically only 3 rounds, and each round was 5 minutes long. As long as the referee did not stop the fight, the two fighters could continue to attack. This was also the most popular attraction here. This person called Misa wasn't weak at all. However, he was indeed no match for Daniel when he was standing and attacking. But when the two of them fell to the ground, the situation instantly changed. Daniel struggled to break free from Misa's ground combat, but he was careless and once again fell to the ground. Misa was lying on Daniel's body, and his fists were like raindrops, falling on Daniel's face. At first, Daniel was still defending, but these people were very good at short-range attacks. After a few blows, Daniel was already stunned. The referee immediately stepped forward to stop the fight. TKO meant that the referee determined that the fight could not continue. It was also a type of KO, but it was not as obvious as a KO. As the referee stopped the fight, Misa was also victorious. Looking at the fight in front of him, Du Feimeng was very excited, but Jiang Hai frowned slightly. He did not care much about this kind of fight. This might have something to do with the tyrannical gene in his heart. He did not like to fight on the ground. Indeed, if he wanted to, the average person would not have the chance to fight on the ground. He could go up and beat the opponent directly. This was his strength. So after watching 2 fights, Jiang Hai was a little bored. He asked Du Feimeng, "Where is the thing I want?" Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimeng turned his head and looked at Jiang Hai. Seeing that Jiang Hai did not seem to be interested in the fight, Du Feimeng shrugged helplessly. "Are you that anxious?" "Yes, there is nothing to watch. If these 2 people fight together, I can beat them in a minute." Hearing Du Feimeng's words, Jiang Hai shrugged and said indifferently. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimeng could not help but be speechless. Sports competitions were like this. Why did people like to watch them? First, because sports competitions were very hot-blooded, known as the battlefield of the peaceful era. Second, it was because these were things that people wanted to do, but could not do. Ordinary people attached their own wishes to these athletes. Watching them compete, they reminisced about their dreams. This was why sports competitions were so attractive. However, if a person's strength surpassed the level of these people, they would not have the leisure to watch. Sometimes, they might be bored and turn on the TV to watch, but most of the time, they would not pay attention to it. Take Jiang Hai for example. He used to like playing basketball, but when he found out that he was better than anyone, he lost interest in it, including the UFC fight in front of him. Well, your life is really boring. After hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimeng shrugged gently. Then, he took a safe from the bodyguard next to him and stuffed it into Jiang Hai's arms. After Jiang Hai took the safe, he also checked the things inside. It was indeed what he wanted, the oil futures transfer contract. The style, paper, and even the words on it were exactly the same as the 2 in his hands. The only difference was the number. The original 400 million, 600 million, now became 1 billion. Seeing that the numbers were all correct, Jiang Hai closed the safe with a smile. Then, he took out a piece of paper from his pocket and handed it to Du Feimeng. After taking the paper, Du Feynman glanced at it. It was the transfer contract of the jewelry that Jiang Hai stored in Miami. This time, the two of them did not owe each other anything. Du Feynman, I'm a little confused. You are a very smart person, but why would you let me take advantage of this? Since the contract was in his hands, Jiang Hai would not hand it over again. But at this time, he was a little confused. Why would Du Feynman let him take advantage of this? He did not understand. After all, these two things were not equal. I have two reasons. First, I really want this batch of jewelry to be useful. You also know that we don't have much oil in Dubai, so we need to make money from other sources. Tourism has always been our top priority, but there are many rich people who are willing to come here to play, but there are too few who are willing to settle here. Moreover, we don't have any famous tourist attractions in Dubai other than the sailing hotel. Originally, I was worried about how to continue developing, but this batch of antiques and jewelry that you brought suddenly gave me a burst of inspiration. If I put a sunken ship full of antiques and jewelry in our bay, do you think there will be fewer people willing to come here to play? Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feynman explained to Jiang Hai with a smile. Chapter 520. That's also true. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but open his mouth. It was really difficult for him to understand the world of the rich. Spending $1 billion to get these jewels from the sea and then throwing them back into the sea. Using this to attract tourists to dive and play, well, Jiang Hai didn't know if it was right or wrong, but it was indeed a good project. If he went to Dubai, and someone told him that there was a sunken ship full of real treasure at the mouth of the bay, and that he could sneak in for $100, he would probably go too. In that case, Dubai had an annual traffic of about 70 million people, according to the airport statistics. If 1 out of 10 people went to play, that would be 7 million people. If each person paid $100, that would be $700 million. If he could make $700 million in 1 year, he would be profitable in 2 years. Of course, this was all a matter of course. If only 1 out of 100 people went, there wouldn't be that many people. But ships didn't cost much. If they broke, they could be replaced at any time. The jewels wouldn't break either. This was a way to make money with almost no cost. The only person in the world who could easily collect a large number of antiques and real jewels at a low price seemed to be Jiang Hai. Jiang Hai believed in his first idea because it was really a way to make money. Jiang Hai even wondered if he could learn from Winthrop and get a sunken ship or a warship. The United States didn't have a lot of other things, but there were plenty of warships. After all, warships needed to be maintained and replaced. During World War II, the United States launched many ships in a month and used numbers to flatten the Pacific Fleet of Japan. After the end of World War II, nuclear power became the new power source. Too many ships with conventional power had reached the age of retirement. Most of them were thrown to coastal cities. Some with a sense of history were turned into museums, such as the one Jiang Hai saw in Boston. Some ordinary ships were either melted down or abandoned. These ships were very cheap. A destroyer could be bought for hundreds of thousands of dollars. After all, those were all scrap iron, but if these scrap iron were to be brought to Winthrop, it would be a perfect tourist attraction. It wasn't easy to come into contact with a warship in China, but here, if they could visit it for $1, many people would be willing to spend the money. On the other hand, diving, catching fish, and searching for treasure, $100 was simply a good price. Well, I almost believed you, but what's the second reason? After thinking for a while, Jiang Hai turned his head and looked at Du Feynman beside him and continued to ask him. Hearing Jiang Hai's second reason, Du Feynman smiled. I remember you said that you invited me to your manor as a guest. Then let's go tomorrow. I'll tell you later. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feynman said to Jiang Hai with a smile. Hearing Du Feynman's words, Jiang Hai was stunned. Originally, he had invited Du Feynman over just to be polite. However, he didn't expect that Du Feynman would really come. Moreover, it seemed that Du Feynman was interested in his manner. Okay. Although curious about why Du Feynman wanted to come, Jiang Hai still nodded and agreed. That's really great. After we watch the game, I'll set up a team here. We can have some fun, and then leave together tomorrow morning. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman looked at Jiang Hai with a gaze that all men understood, and then smiled slyly. Jiang Hai was just about to agree, but Prawalton, who had been sitting beside him, kicked him lightly. Looking at Prawalton, who was sitting upright, Jiang Hai really didn't expect that she had been listening to their conversation. However, Jiang Hai didn't care. Since she was here, he didn't mind letting her know some details. This might not be possible. I'll come to you tomorrow morning. I have a date with a beautiful woman tonight. After Jiang Hai finished speaking, he tilted his head and looked at Prawalton. This made Du Feynman slap his forehead, as if he just remembered her. Jiang, you're a lucky guy. The Walton family is just like the Abu Dhabi consortium in our world. Although they keep a low profile, their strength is unimaginable. If you really want to be with Miss Prawalton, whether it's a blessing or a blessing, you have to decide for yourself. Du Feynman shrugged at Jiang Hai and said to him with a smile. Hearing Du Feynman's words, Jiang Hai also touched his nose. Indeed, he also knew that Du Feynman was doing this for his own good, but between him and Prawalton, there were some inexplicable feelings. But he was also very clear that between him and her, there shouldn't be too much of a connection. After all, the concepts and thoughts of the two were completely different. They might really be together because they needed each other. After chatting with Du Feynman for a while, before the game was over, Jiang Hai had already left with Prawalton. After locking the box into the compartment of the car, Jiang Hai and Prawalton drove back to the Walton Manor. Looking at Jiang Hai in front of her, Prawalton hesitated for a moment and said to him, Jiang, I don't know if you will believe me. This Du Feynman is not as simple as he looks. Hearing her words, Jiang Hai, who was driving, also smiled. Sure enough, she heard the conversation between them. I know, I have never thought of him as simple. Nodding, Jiang Hai was very sure that he would not underestimate Du Feynman. Although this guy usually pretended to be stupid, in fact, Jiang Hai never knew what this guy was thinking. But he only knew that this guy didn't like to use his brain, so he was a little stupid. In his eyes, people all over the world were a little stupid, but this guy was pushed out by the Dubai royal family to become the spokesperson of Dubai. This meant that this person was definitely one of the smartest people in the Dubai royal family. If you treated these royal family and these people as fools, it was possible that in the end, he would swallow you whole. It's good that you think so. I'm just reminding you. Seeing that Jiang Hai's words didn't seem to be perfunctory, Prawalton didn't continue to speak. She also didn't ask Jiang Hai what he got, nor did she ask Jiang Hai what he paid. He had to admit that this woman, who knew when to advance and retreat, was really smart. At least, she understood people's hearts better than Jiang Hai. If it were him, he probably wouldn't be able to hold back his curiosity and ask. But sometimes, when this question was asked, it would cause a rift. Moreover, he and Prawalton weren't that familiar with each other. Then Prawalton took the initiative to change the topic, starting with the night scene of Atlantic City. Yes, it was already night. Speaking of Jiang Hai's beef, Jiang Hai also said that he also raised sheep and donkeys, which were all excellent breeds of Huaxia. This made Prawalton a little curious. She wanted to taste the Huaxia protected breeds that Jiang Hai mentioned. The only pity was that these protected breeds couldn't be promoted, and only Jiang Hai ate them. The two talked as they drove. Not long after, the car had already stopped in front of Prawalton's villa. After the car stopped, Isabel Roland was already standing respectfully in front of the car, wearing a set of official's uniform. She took Jiang Hai and Prawalton, and then led the two into the villa. As soon as they walked through the door, Jiang Hai heard a burst of voices in the villa's hall. Although they were speaking English and their accent was a little strange, Jiang Hai could hear that there were about 20 women's voices. He couldn't help but look at Pra Walton beside him. Pra Walton just smiled and didn't say anything. She continued to lead Jiang Hai in. When the three of them walked into the hall, Jiang Hai saw that there were more than 20 women in the hall at this time. However, those 20-plus girls were all of Asian descent. Their appearances were more or less the same. They had large cartoon-like eyes, sharp chins, high noses, long straight hair, slender necks and beautiful collarbones. Furthermore, even though they were wearing clothes, their clothes were very simple and unadorned. Their deep cleavage, small waists and long white legs were exposed. Among them, the most eye-catching feature was Cheryl Lee's slightly round face. As for the rest of the women, to be honest, Jiang Hai thought that they were all about the same. What's this situation? Looking at the group of women in front of him, Jiang Hai was a little confused. Why did she call him back so anxiously for this? He looked at Pra Walton. What is this little girl trying to do? Didn't you say that you haven't tasted these Korean girls yet? Today, I'll let you have a good taste. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Pra Walton slowly walked behind Jiang Hai. She wrapped her arms around Jiang Hai's waist and looked at him. Hey, this is a bit too much. Looking at the women in front of him, Jiang Hai felt his scalp go numb. Is she trying to kill me? He was already feeling a little powerless when it came to fighting 1 against 6, let alone 20. What kind of joke is this? These women were all specially found by Cheryl. I heard that they were all streamers in South Korea. They have sweet voices, good figures, and can even dance. This is a gift that I've meticulously prepared for you. Don't be a killjoy. Let's see where your limit is. Alright, ladies, I believe Cheryl has already told you the purpose of your visit today. Let's move. Following Pra Walton's order, the women in front of her quickly made their battle preparations. Hey! At this time, Jiang Hai was still not ready. Just as he said that, the women had already pounced on him. Chapter 521. Hiss, ah. The next morning, when Jiang Hai walked out of Pra Walton's manor, he actually couldn't walk properly. In northeastern terms, he was having a hard time walking. Looking back at the villa, Jiang Hai sighed. Last night's experience was indeed not bad. But if he did it a few more times, he probably wouldn't be far from the middle of his lifespan. Those Southern Korean girls were more than a little crazy. At first, someone even asked him if he wanted to wear a raincoat, and Pra Walton said, whoever gets pregnant with Jiang Hai's child will be rewarded with $10 million. In an instant, the girls went crazy. They used any part of their bodies to help Jiang Hai. This was indeed a feeling that Jiang Hai had never experienced before. These Southern Gaoli girls were indeed in good shape. Although they all looked about the same, to be honest, they were very much in line with the current aesthetic standards. They had big eyes, sharp chins, high noses, small mouths, white and tender skin, and their somewhat unscientific upper body and waist. It was really a little surprising. According to them, their waist only had this effect after they lost 2 ribs. As for the rest, it would depend on training and the like. Just as Pra Walton said, Jiang Hai was just fighting with them, not marrying them. In the past, Jiang Hai always felt that girls like this were no different from high-end blow-up dolls. But then he thought about it. High-end dolls would cost around 80 to 100,000 in China. He might not even be able to spend that much on a wife. Of course, if he met some weird people who wanted a house, a car, or a RV, that would be another matter. But basically, many families didn't sell girls. Since the conditions of the 2 families were similar, it was basically a 50-50 split. There wasn't much to pay attention to. Most importantly, a wife who spent so much money to marry really wasn't as good-looking as them. But that night, Jiang Hai was almost done for. He didn't sleep at all. Since he came back last night, he had been free until now. He limped to his car, started the engine, and left helplessly. Miss, Are you going to let her go just like that? At this time, in a room on the second floor, Isabel Roland slowly walked to Pra Walton, who was standing by the window and watching Jiang Hai leave, and asked her. He's destined not to belong to me. Perhaps it's better for us to just have these crazy memories. Through the gap between the curtains, Pra Walton watched Jiang Hai's car driving away without any expression on his face. Miss. Hearing Pra Walton's words, Isabel Roland couldn't help but sigh, and then hugged Pra Walton from behind. She did this to let Pra Walton feel her presence. Pra Walton gently patted her on the arm. She had already felt what she wanted to express, Jiang Hai. Jumping over Pra Walton's body, Isabel also looked at Jiang Hai's car in the distance. Isabel didn't know how to feel about the person who took away her body, but she knew that this feeling made her feel a little reluctant when she watched Jiang Hai leave. But when she thought of Jiang Hai, she felt a little sweet in her heart. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't know that two women were watching him leave. After leaving the manor, he went to the Caesar Palace he went to yesterday. Because he had already made an appointment with Du Feynman, he would be a guest in his manor today. Of course, the so-called guest was probably just looking around. Although Jiang Hai didn't know his pulse, if he wanted to see, Jiang Hai would not refuse. Of course, if he was interested in his manor, no matter who he was, Jiang Hai would slap him away. What a joke, that was something he would never sell. There was no one else. Mr. Jiang Hai, you are here. When Jiang Hai arrived at the Caesar Palace, the person who saw him yesterday was already waiting for him at the door. When he saw Jiang Hai coming down, he quickly greeted him and said respectfully. Didn't you say you were going to my place today? Where's Du Feynman? After getting out of the car, Jiang Hai asked this person curiously. Vroom vroom vroom. But before this person answered, Jiang Hai suddenly heard a deafening roar. Then, a silver-white light flashed from the underground parking lot of the Caesar Palace. In the next second, a rather avant-garde sports car with a metallic feel and personality appeared in front of him. The whole car was silver-white, and the whole car presented another kind of streamline. The front of the car was made into a W shape. In addition to the prominent driver's seat, there were two front tires on both sides of the car. There was only one driver's seat in the car. The driver's seat was made of transparent orange glass, and there was only one seat in the driver's seat. Du Feynman, whom Jiang Hai just asked, was sitting in this seat at this time. After arriving in front of Jiang Hai, he gently drifted and parked the car side by side beside Jiang Hai. Then, he opened the car's, lid? Well, Jiang Hai didn't know how to describe it. It was like a car's skylight, but the whole driver's seat was made of glass, so when it was opened, the car instantly became a convertible. Hey, Jiang Hai, you're too late. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feynman said with a smug face. Your timing is quite accurate. Knowing that I'm here, you deliberately came over to show off. TSK, to be honest, your car is really good. Looking at Du Feynman, Jiang Hai also smiled, then touched his chin. Looking at this car, it's really cool. This is Lamborghini's concept car, Lamborghini Egoista. This is Italian, which means selfish. This car has 600 horsepower and a 5.2 LV10 engine. In order to get this thing, I spent a lot of effort, but fortunately, this thing is quite cool. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feynman also smiled and said. It was obvious that he was also very satisfied with this car. TSK, this car is really good, but there's no way to carry people? You've been driving this car by yourself. Walking around the car, Jiang Hai nodded. It was indeed very good. He heard that the Dubai tycoons were obsessed with Lamborghini, causing the people in China to like this car very much. In the past, Jiang Hai didn't like this big bull very much. Compared to bulls and horses, he preferred tridents and the like. But now, it seemed that this big bull was better than other sports cars for a reason. Hey, driving this car is my little baby. By the way, how's the road at your place? Is it okay to drive this car? Although he wanted to show off, Du Feynman still said happily. No problem, I've flattened it. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai replied with a smile, then sat on his shield. Originally, the road in Winthrop wasn't very good. Of course, it wasn't too bad either. It was basically similar to the first-line roads in China. It was inevitable that there would be some bumps when driving, but ordinary cars would have no problem at all. Sports cars wouldn't have a big problem, but supercars would be more or less troublesome. However, since Jianghai was attacked and Winthrop was expanded, Jianghai and the town jointly funded the repair of this road. Now the road in front of Jianghai's house was much smoother, and there would be no problem for anyone to drive on it. Seeing Jianghai start the engine and drive away, Du Feynman also stepped on the accelerator and followed Jianghai. After he left, 2 Rolls-Royces, which were the ones in Jianghai's house, followed closely behind. A nouveau riche was indeed a nouveau riche. He drove a supercar, and his bodyguards also drove an RV. He was really rich. Because Du Feynman was in the front this time, and he also paid the fine for Jianghai for speeding along the way, Jianghai drove very fast. His shield naturally couldn't be compared to a supercar. Compared to an ordinary sports car, his shield was much slower. After all, this car was bulletproof. With such a thick steel plate on the car, how could it run so fast? So even if he ran as fast as he couldn't reach 200 kilometers per hour, but it wasn't a problem to maintain 150 or 60 kilometers per hour. It took Jianghai nearly a day to drive here, but it only took him more than 5 hours to go back. At around 2:00 in the afternoon, he had already arrived at the airport in Boston. In about half an hour, he could go home. He deliberately called home at this time. After all, Du Feynman was a member of the royal family. It was impossible for him to not eat a meal when he came here. And his bodyguards, it was impossible for Jianghai to let them starve, right? At this time, preparing lunch was the best choice. After Jianghai called, Xiaoya came out of the room and began to prepare a rich lunch. Daliana, Marion, and Bernice were there to help. While they were preparing, Jianghai and the others had unknowingly arrived in front of his manor. However, when Jianghai drove to the front of the manor, he was stunned for a moment. It was because he didn't know when, but there were a lot of people standing outside the gate of his manor. Looking at these people who had the same skin color as him, Jianghai was a little puzzled. Du Feynman was even more puzzled. He stopped the car far away. His identity made him have to be careful. The 2 Rolls-Royces behind him also stopped there. Seeing Du Feynman stop, Jianghai drove to the front of the gate. Looking at these people in front of him, he was a little puzzled. These people weren't here before he left. What were they doing now? Were these people tourists? Are you also here to buy seafood? Go to the back and line up. There are people here who want to buy seafood. Seeing that Jianghai actually went directly to the gate, although many people here didn't recognize Jianghai's car logo, it didn't prevent them from knowing that this car was definitely valuable. It wasn't hard to imagine why a rich person would come here. Immediately, someone in the front of the line shouted at Jianghai. Chapter 522. Are you here to buy seafood? Hearing their words, Jianghai couldn't help but be stunned for a moment, and then asked curiously. Of course, aren't you? Hearing Jianghai's words, the people here said confidently. As Winthrop became more and more popular, Jianghai's seafood was second to none in the eyes of all the tourists in Winthrop. Even in the eyes of the Americans, the price of the seafood Jianghai sold was acceptable. Of course, they weren't referring to the abalones, sea cucumbers, and the like. They didn't eat these things. They were referring to the lobsters. In Jianghai's manor, a 30-pound lobster was only sold for $3,000. Generally, the price of $3,000 could be bought from fishing companies, but they couldn't buy it so cheaply. Basically, such a heavy lobster was sold for $3,600 to $4,000. Jiang Hai's lobster was sold for $3,000, and they could still afford it. It was precisely because of the addition of these locals that the tourists felt uncomfortable. Originally, Jiang Hai only sold the lobsters to them, and they didn't care very much. They thought that they were taking care of Jiang Hai's business. The quality of people was not the same. The lobster was sold for $100,000 in China, but it was sold for $18,000 here. They still felt that Jiang Hai was taking advantage of them. Gradually, some people began to nitpick. His was too big, his was too small, his meat was not too solid, the price was too expensive, and the things he matched were not to his liking, etc. There was no other way. There were all kinds of people in this world, so they either had to swallow their anger or fight back. Fortunately, this was Jiang Hai's character, and Edward Anderson also inherited his character. Edward Anderson also told Jiang Hai about these things. Jiang Hai's meaning was that this was the price, and it was up to them to buy it or not. In fact, after Jiang Hai's tough fight, some people did not buy it, but most people still bought it. Those who did not want to buy could only look at them angrily. Without their money, Jiang Hai would not go bankrupt. However, it was precisely because of these people that Jiang Hai and the others did not accept reservations. Every day, they would grab some and walk around the city. If someone wanted to buy it, they would sell it. If no one wanted to buy it, they would take it back to eat it. Anyway, they did not lack these things. Moreover, Jiang Hai liked to eat it very much. They were not afraid of these things being left behind. But this time, there were foreigners who came to buy it. Many tourists panicked. This was because Edward Anderson's team could only catch a limited number of lobsters every day. Even if they got up early in the morning to catch lobsters, Edward Anderson's team only had 5 people in total. Among them, Marlon Rupert had to fly the plane to patrol, so there were only 4 people left. These 4 people mainly had to monitor the growth of the fish. Excluding lunch and rest time, they only had about 1 hour a day. About 2 hours were used to catch lobsters. How much could they catch? If they caught it casually, it would be a lot. However, it would take some time to find lobsters that were more than 15 kilograms. The number of lobsters they caught every day was about 10. Originally, it was only for tourists. There would even be leftovers. However, now that the local and American tourists came to buy it, the Huaxia tourists did not have enough to eat. If it was just lobsters, it would be fine. The problem was that abalones, sea cucumbers, Arctic shrimps, shellfish, and so on were all caught by Edward Anderson's team. The number was also limited. Jiang Hai's team, the seller's market, was not anxious, but the buyer's market was going crazy. It was precisely because of this that on the second day after Jiang Hai left, there were already some foodies waiting at Jiang Hai's place. At present, it was already the 3rd day they waited here. When they saw Jiang Hai's car suddenly drive over, these people had some common enemies. Oh, then wait for a while. It will probably take some time for them to get the seafood out. I have to go in first. This is my home. Seeing that these people were here to take care of his business, Jiang Hai nodded and said to these people. Then, under these people's disbelieving gazes, Jiang Hai opened the door and motioned for Du Feimin's team to go in. They did not recognize Jiang Hai's car, but they recognized the Rolls-Royce and the strange-looking sports car in front. Although it looked strange, they also knew that a sports car like this was definitely not cheap. Hey, brother, can we go in and take a look? After seeing the motorcade go in, Jiang Hai's car was also about to go in. At this time, the person in the first row immediately waved his hand and said to Jiang Hai. He was indeed a tourist. Now, the legend of Jiang Hai was being spread everywhere in Winthrop. He was a little confused and did not pay attention. Now, it seemed that the person in front of him was the legendary Jiang Hai. He had heard that Jiang Hai had a lot of good things here. The priceless beef, the golden sea stall, the only forest nearby, and the seabed full of coral reefs and fish. In the words of Winthrop people, Jiang Hai's place was simply a fairy tale world. However, this was a private manor and was not open to the public. They could not enter even if they wanted to. Now that they finally saw Jiang Hai, they had to ask him properly. They couldn't have not been to the best place. Not today, I have a guest. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai closed the door and drove into the manor. Seeing that Jiang Hai rejected his request, the person could not help but twitch his mouth. However, he did not speak. A few young people behind him had already walked away with jealousy. What's there to be arrogant about? He's just a country bumpkin. He can't survive in China, so he came to the United States to act like a big shot. We are his guests. Don't you know that guests are gods? He's so arrogant. If I had known earlier, I wouldn't have bought his seafood. That's right. This guy is just a playboy. If he was in China, he wouldn't have survived more than 3 episodes. Tisk, how many people can he afford to offend people who can afford to eat his lobster? There are really all kinds of birds in the forest. Eating his lobster is already an honor for him, but he's still so arrogant. This manor will be gone sooner or later. Listening to the jealous words of the people behind, the person in front couldn't help but laugh. In fact, he was also a little jealous in his heart. After all, Jiang Hai was actually about the same age as them. However, Jiang Hai's style at this time was not something these people could compare to. Whether it was money, status, fame, or the friends he made, Jiang Hai's style was not something they could compare to. He was the closest just now, and he saw it the most clearly. The person driving the sports car, if there was no accident, should be the legendary Middle Eastern nouveau riche. He did have the capital to be arrogant. Moreover, Jiang Hai was not wrong. He didn't know them. Why would he let them into his private manor to play? If it were him, he wouldn't be willing either. Alright, you youngsters, you're too straightforward. Don't you know how much power this Jiang Hai has in the local area? If you whisper here later and are heard by others, I guess you will never be able to buy his seafood. If you don't want to eat, there is a car over there. You can go back directly. At this moment, a man in his 50s said in a low voice. Hearing this man's words, the people in the line became silent at once. Leave now? They were unwilling. Those who hadn't tasted Jiang Hai's seafood before were more confused and curious. They had never eaten it before, but they also wanted to try it. However, after tasting it, they would know what was called delicious in the world. Compared with the things in Jiang Hai's manor, everything else was rubbish. It didn't require too many complicated cooking methods to make the food they bought delicious. This was the reason why they came here. Sometimes, people were really realistic. After hearing this middle-aged man's words, although these people secretly whispered a few words, none of them left. They were still waiting for Edward Anderson to appear. At this time, Jiang Hai didn't know about this. He had already arrived in front of his villa with Du Feimin. Although Du Feimin's bodyguards got out of the car, they didn't enter the villa. Only Jiang Hai and Du Feimin entered. When they walked in, the fragrance of the food had already entered their noses. Hey! Jiang Hai is back. This is Mr. Du Feimin Vihar Muhammad bin Rashid Al Maktoum. My name is Bernice. I'm Jiang Hai's friend. Seeing Jiang Hai and Du Feimin walk in, Bernice, who was originally busy, came out with a plate of food. After putting it on the table, she introduced herself to Du Feimin. Wow, beautiful lady from the East. Nice to meet you. Since you are Jiang Hai's friend, then you are also my friend. My friends all call me Du Feimin. You can also call me by this name. Of course, if you call me by my full name, I won't mind, huh? After hearing Bernice's introduction, Du Feimin glanced at Jiang Hai and gave him a look of admiration. His meaning was very clear. He didn't expect Jiang Hai to be hiding a beauty in his golden house. A young man and a young woman living in a villa. They weren't related by blood, and there were no obstacles between them. If you said that they had a pure relationship, regardless of whether others believed it or not, Du Feynman definitely wouldn't believe it. However, this time, Du Feynman had to believe it even if he didn't want to, because Jiang Hai and Bernice really didn't have that kind of relationship. You're back. Quickly sit down. There's still a fish left. The steak is ready. At this time, Xiaoya also came out of the kitchen with a pot of braised sirloin. After seeing Jiang Hai and the other two, she smiled and said. When Du Feynman smelled the smell of the pot of beef, his eyes suddenly narrowed. Looking at the pot of beef, he would never forget it. This beef was the kind of beef he had eaten when he was in the Qi family. He didn't expect that Jiang Hai really had this kind of beef here. If this was the case, then his second goal might be achieved soon. Chapter 523. Oh, my God, this is the best beef I've ever eaten. Oh, is this cod? Oh my God, is this cod? Is this mutton? Huh, Jiang, if you're hiding something. This lobster is amazing both in size and taste. Looking at the table full of delicacies in front of him, Du Feynman really couldn't stop eating with his fork. He kept putting pieces of meat into his mouth, and he didn't even put down his thumb. If he wasn't gesturing to Xiaoya, then he was gesturing to Jiang Hai. Looking at him, De Lian and the others were also very happy. These things belonged to their family, so they were naturally very happy when Du Feynman praised them like this. As the head chef today, Xiaoya's face also showed a trace of a smile, because a guest like Du Feynman was naturally a chef's favorite. Moreover, to be honest, she also knew that her cooking skills weren't bad. Today, in order to entertain Du Feynman, Jiang Hai had prepared a lot of delicious food, and beef was naturally the main dish today. There were 3 types of beef, 2 Huaxia style, and 1 Western style. The Western style was naturally the steak, which was needless to say. After Jiang Hai's beef was fried, there was no need to pour any sauce, just sprinkle some pepper and basil leaves on it, and the taste would come out directly. It was so delicious that it made people's hair stand on end. Black pepper sauce and the like were equally delicious, but it would destroy the original taste of the beef. Taking a bite would be like biting a piece of nature, and if sauce was used, it would only be delicious, but it wouldn't have the original taste. However, after Xiaoya's research, she found that there were a few dishes in Huaxia that could infinitely amplify the natural taste of this kind of beef. One of them was stewed beef brisket. Of course, this wasn't an ordinary stewed beef brisket. Instead, red wine was added to it, which meant that it was an improved version of Burgundy red wine stewed beef. Using red wine instead of water and smearing honey on the meat, the stewed beef had a natural red wine aroma and a slight sweetness of honey. At the same time, the red wine was added, especially the red wine from Jiang Hai's manor, which had a rich and pure taste, so there was no need to add ketchup. Only these things needed to be placed properly. Some orange peel and spices were added, and the stewed beef not only had a natural taste, but also had a slight taste, so it naturally tasted better. The other dish was beef, which was the most simple home-cooked dish, stir-fried beef slices. It used onions from Jiang Hai, as well as some xiran and sesame seeds. When frying, one must pay attention to the heat. One must use the heat of the pot to quickly fry the meat, but one must not use the power of the fire to cook the meat. Only Xiaoya knew how to cook the meat. According to the Westerners, these 3 beef dishes were today's main dishes. Of course, these were not the only ones that could be the main dishes. For example, the braised codfish. This codfish was a real Atlantic codfish, although Jiang Hai didn't breed it. However, there were a lot of codfish in the Atlantic Ocean, and the seaweed in Jiang Hai's sea area had a special ability. If ordinary fish swam here, they wouldn't be willing to leave, and it was the same for codfish. In addition to the codfish, there was also the grouper raised by Jiang Hai. This grouper was originally raised by Jiang Hai, and was caught by Edward Anderson. They didn't catch it to kill the fish, but to check the growth of the fish regularly. Usually, after catching the fish with fake bait, they would release the fish. However, this fish was obviously a little greedy, and swallowed it deep. Its intestines were scraped, and it couldn't survive even if it was released. Therefore, it was sent to Jiang Hai as an extra dish. Therefore, although this grouper was raised by Jiang Hai for half a year, and its size wasn't small, it wasn't too big either. It was enough to be sold, but it wasn't at the level that Jiang Hai wanted. Therefore, it was considered a small fry, and it wasn't considered a main dish for Jiang Hai. In addition to the fish and beef, Jiang Hai also got a big lobster. This Boston lobster was 20 kilograms, and if it was sold to a fishing company, it would be worth at least $5,000. However, Jiang Hai killed it for the big boss who gave him $2 billion in oil futures. Of course, there were many lobsters of this size in his farm, and this wasn't the only one. Otherwise, why would Jiang Hai be so generous? He was actually a very stingy person. And most importantly, he caught more than one lobster. The bodyguards outside were also eating big lobsters. Although they weren't as big as Jiang Hai's, they were still about 15 kilograms. They were definitely big guys. Du Feynman didn't eat abalones and sea cucumbers. As for shark fins, Jiang Hai wouldn't deliberately hunt these guys. The longer he stayed at the seaside, the more he felt for these marine creatures. If it wasn't necessary, he wouldn't take the initiative to kill them. The Yangtze River grenadier fish and Chinese bahaba fish had only been raised for more than a month, and it wasn't time to eat them yet. Naturally, Jiang Hai would bring them to the table. Therefore, in addition to these things, the other dishes on the table were the mutton and some vegetables that Jiang Hai brought back from China. The Ujimkin sheep was originally a very good breed of sheep. After eating Jiang Hai's pasture for a month, the quality of the meat was even better. The small hot pot and roasted lamb chops made from its meat made Du Feynman very happy. Jiang Hai and the others enjoyed the meal, and Du Feynman was also very happy. In fact, as a rich man, he had eaten all kinds of delicious food in his life. The culinary skills of those chefs were much better than Xiao Ye's. He could tell that Xiao Ye's culinary skills were good, but compared to the national chefs, it would be considered good if she could give 65 out of 100 points. After all, she was still young. She had talent, but talent hadn't been exchanged for strength yet. But the dishes she made use of the raw power of the dishes to raise the quality of the dishes. This made him value Jiang Hai's ingredients even more. This also confirmed the voice in his heart. After a harmonious dinner, Du Feynman smiled and said to Jiang Hai, "Jiang, there's a saying in Huaxia, walk 100 steps after a meal and you'll live to 99. Since we're done eating, shouldn't we go out for a walk?" Shaking his head, Jiang Hai said to Du Feynman, "No, you missed it. There's a saying in our country, walk 100 steps after a meal and you'll live to 99. Lie on the bed after a meal and you'll live to 208. Lie on the bed and you'll sleep and you'll live to 1,000 years old." Some people like to go out for a walk after dinner. This was considered to be digesting food and losing weight. However, Jiang Hai was actually a very lazy person. He insisted on running every day because of the habit he left behind in the past. In order to make his body not appear too abrupt, he was usually a very lazy person. "Hey, brother, I don't want to live to 1,000 years old. That's too boring. So, as the host, aren't you going to accompany your guest for a walk?" Shrugging helplessly, Du Feynman said to Jiang Hai. It seemed like he had made up his mind to say it. "All right then." Jiang Hai looked at him and nodded. Then, he stood up and followed him along the river to the beach. Of course, when they saw Du Feynman coming out, the bodyguards outside his door also gathered instantly. 10 people followed Du Feynman and Jiang Hai from a distance. They were sure that they couldn't hear the conversation between Du Feynman and Jiang Hai, but they could also rush to their side in a few seconds. This was how the most professional bodyguards did things. If you have something to say, just say it. After walking for about 5 minutes, Jiang Hai looked at the group of people behind him and said to Du Feynman with a chuckle, He didn't believe that this Middle Eastern nouveau riche would only come over to chat with him. Heh, I don't know if you still remember what I said to you at Caesar's palace last night. Hearing Jiang Hai speak so straightforwardly, Du Feimin didn't beat around the bush and directly said to Jiang Hai. Which sentence? Hearing his words, Jiang Hai looked at him with some confusion. When he said this, Du Feimin was stunned. Cough, you asked me why I wanted to use 1 billion to buy your 900 million worth of jewelry. I said it was one of the reasons, but I didn't say the other one. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin glanced at Jiang Hai and said to him seriously. Oh, then tell me. Hearing him say so, Jiang Hai smiled brightly and asked. Oh, then go ahead. First of all, the reason I bought your jewelry is indeed to build a boat. That 100 million is actually to express my goodwill to you. Of course, second of all, regardless of whether it succeeds or not, this 100 million is yours. I won't take it back. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feimin first stated a premise. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai nodded. If you want it back, I'll calculate it for you. Second, we want your beef. No, to be exact, we want your cow. I know how precious your cow is. We'll spend money to buy it, but I hope it's a live one. Sure enough, after he finished speaking, Du Feimin revealed his true intentions. Jiang Hai knew that these Middle Eastern nouveau riches wouldn't do anything that would cause them to lose money. Originally, he was still thinking, what exactly did these guys see in him? They saw his cow, but they weren't going to rob it, they were going to buy it. Hey, Du Feimin, I might have to disappoint you this time. Shaking his head, Jiang Hai looked at Du Feimin and laughed. Is the price not right? Or are you not going to sell it? Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin looked at him with some confusion and asked. Don't ask me for the secret recipe, because I don't know the secret recipe either. I'm only telling you because I think you're a friend. I hired a research team at Boston University to study my cattle, but they couldn't find anything. The next generation they bred was just ordinary Angus cattle, and the cattle that left here will slowly degenerate back to their original state. Most importantly, there were cattle here 10 years ago, but the cattle were just ordinary cattle. You can buy cattle if you want, but you can choose any of the cattle here. I know you have the ability to go through customs, but once you go through customs, it'll just be an ordinary cow. Chapter 524. Looking at Du Feimin, Jiang Hai smiled and talked about the situation in his manner. Hearing Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin couldn't help but be stunned. What's going on? Seeing that Jiang Hai didn't seem to be lying, Du Feimin couldn't help but ponder. Indeed, his main reason for pleasing Jiang Hai was to bring in Jiang Hai's cows. He was a member of the royal family. His heart had always served the royal family of Dubai. Jiang Hai's cows were a money-making ground. If they could really be cultivated successfully, it would be a huge profit. An ordinary cow was sold for $5,000, while Jiang Hai's cows were sold for $150,000. A 30-fold difference was not a joke. Jiang Hai's land was limited. At most, he could raise tens of thousands of cows. But if the royal family of Dubai invested in artificial pastures, how many cows could they raise? 100,000? 500,000? 1 million? If 1 million cows could be raised in a year, how much would it be worth? 150 billion. With this sum of money, Dubai's losses and the recession in tourism would be nothing. But now, Jiang Hai's words extinguished the little flame in his heart. Du Feimin looked at Jiang Hai, wondering if Jiang Hai was bluffing him. However, he could see that Jiang Hai was telling the truth. This pasture, the cows here, and Jiang Hai here. It was a triangular ring. The cattle couldn't leave this place, and Jiang Hai couldn't leave this place. Only with Jiang Hai, the grassland, and the cattle here could such a miraculous breed of cattle appear. Therefore, when he heard Jiang Hai's words, Du Feimin hesitated. If you don't believe me, then you can take a few. Seeing that Du Feynman was still hesitating, Jiang Hai smiled and said to him. He really didn't care because he knew that these people wouldn't be able to research anything. Just like the research team in Boston, that research team had been researching for a long time. In the beginning, when the cows were brought over, they were like Jiang Hai's cows. Marble veins were almost all over their bodies. The cows were abnormally strong, and their fur was smooth and soft. It could be said that they were the best breed of cattle. But after a month, the cows were beaten back to their original form. Although they were still strong, they were at most very strong ordinary Angus cows. These cows were not directly infused with spiritual qi by Jiang Hai. After eating the grass here, the spiritual qi produced by the grass entered their bodies and was stored there. Therefore, they were not like Little Yellow, Little White, and Big Fool, who had the opportunity to evolve. The spiritual qi that was not directly infused with spiritual qi would run away with the passage of time. Therefore, after being slaughtered, there were still marble veins, but they had already returned to the most normal state, about 5%. In that case, the cow wouldn't be able to sell for 150,000 yuan. It would be good if it could be sold for 20,000 yuan. Although they were more expensive than ordinary cows, these cows were not worth the exclamations. After that, Jiang Hai also tested the soil and grass. When these things were brought to the laboratory, they indeed contained a lot of spiritual energy. But these things were not as good as the cows. After leaving Jiang Hai's land, the spiritual energy had disappeared in 3 days. The grass was just a relatively healthy pasture, and the soil was just a relatively fertile soil. It was precisely because of this that Jiang Hai did not care if Du Feynman took these cows away. Not to mention Du Feynman, even if the US government came, he would not care. This was because the real cause of the mutation of these things was not the natural world, but him, Jiang Hai. As long as he was here, his cows would be the best. If he was not here, this would be an ordinary money-losing pasture. If this is really the case, then it's a pity. I originally thought that this was something that would benefit mankind. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feynman said with a sigh. Jiang Hai also shrugged. He had already seen Du Feynman's shamelessness a long time ago. Benefit mankind? More like benefit the royal family of Dubai. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feynman finally hesitated and said seriously, but even so, I still want to study your cows. How about this? 1 cow for $1.5 million. I'll buy 30 of them. What do you think? The price of buying breeding cows was more expensive than ordinary beef cows. This was common sense, not to mention that he wanted live cows. You can deal with the customs at the customs. You'll be in charge of settling the customs, it has nothing to do with me. You can also choose any cattle you like. Take whichever one you like. I don't want 1.5 million. You've given me a discount of 100 million on the gemstones, so I can't be too greedy. How about 1 million? 30 cows. Your people will be in charge of the transportation and so on. When the time comes, you'll know that it's not the cattle that are magical. Jiang Hai shrugged and said seriously. Seeing how straightforward Jiang Hai was, Du Feynman also sighed. If this was really the case, then he would be depressed if he could not earn this large sum of money. However, he was still pleased with Jiang Hai's attitude. He transferred $30 million to Jiang Hai on the spot. This was the price of 30 cows. Then, he called people in Dubai and asked them to tackle the problem of the US government and customs. No matter what it was, as long as it involved the country, it was very easy to solve. For example, the giant pandas that Hua Xia sent everywhere. If it was an ordinary person, even if it was a government official, it was absolutely impossible to send this thing out of the country. It was a national treasure. If someone dared to be arrogant, then their entire family would be killed by the government. But if it escalated to the level of the country, then it was much easier. After Du Feynman made the call, the people in Dubai had already started to move. They contacted the ship and the US government. Of course, these things had nothing to do with Jiang Hai. This is my mission. If the cows return to the country, then it has nothing to do with me. But I don't think you'll lie to me. If these cows return to the country and become ordinary cows, then our plan is officially ruined. Phew, but to be honest, your ingredients are very good, very good. I want to talk to you about another business. After about 10 minutes, Du Feimin finished the call and helplessly let out a long sigh, then said to Jiang Hai with a smile. What business? Jiang Hai didn't care about the 30 million he earned. Having money was better than not having money. Now that he heard that Du Feimin wanted to do business, he couldn't help but look at him with some doubts. What else does he want? Food for the royal family. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feimin said seriously. Hearing his words, Jiang Hai couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. I think you're right. This is a free advertisement for you. Of course, it's mainly because the ingredients here are really good. To be honest, Miss Ye's culinary skills are very good, but compared to the top chefs, it's still a lot worse. But she actually used the power of the ingredients to push the food itself to the extreme. You should know that we, the children of the royal family, are very particular about eating. So I need you to provide us with fresh meat. I'm very interested in your beef, mutton, fish, lobster, and shellfish. I can use your retail price to increase by 5% to purchase your ingredients. We'll be responsible for transportation and the like. After all, there are plenty of empty planes in Dubai. But you have to ensure our consumption. Of course, our consumption won't be too much. After all, it's only the royal family of Dubai. Looking at Jiang Hai, Du Feimin said seriously. That's not a problem. But how much do you need? You have to tell me, so I can have an estimate in my heart. Hearing Du Feimin's words, Jiang Hai smiled. He was very interested in selling things. He didn't care who he sold these things to, nor did he care about the square. However, if there was such a free super advertisement, then Jiang Hai's seafood and the like could be sold at a high price. This was also what he was most interested in. Thinking about it, when his beef was sold in the future, it could be labeled as exclusive to the royal family of Dubai. The 13 slots would instantly fill up. Most importantly, Dubai was a kingdom of the UAE. The kingdoms of the UAE all wore the same pants. At that time, it was very likely that the beef would change from exclusive to the royal family of Dubai to exclusive to the royal family of the UAE. The meaning would be completely different. There are a total of 713 people in the royal family of Dubai. Including their wives, there are less than 5,000 people. According to the daily consumption of 2 kilograms of beef and 1 kilogram of fish per person, if there are no banquets, the annual consumption is about 3.65 million kilograms of beef and 1.8 million kilograms of fish. However, you also know that we like to hold banquets and the like, so this number will increase a little. The annual consumption of beef is about 5 million kilograms and 3 million kilograms of fish. After a rough calculation, Du Feimin said to Jiang Hai. However, when he heard his words, Jiang Hai secretly cried out in his heart. An Angus bull was about 750 kilograms. The slaughter rate was 60%, which meant that 450 kilograms of meat could be sliced from one bull. The royal family of Dubai would definitely not eat the inferior meat, so they could only eat the best, which was about 200 kilograms. 5 million kilograms meant 25,000 cows. Well, Jiang Hai didn't need to do anything else. He just needed to focus on raising cows next year. 3 million kilograms of fish, which was 3,000 tons. This amount wasn't too big, but the amount of cows, it was really not small. Fish is not a problem. Around March next year, when I start fishing here, I can provide it. However, the beef is somewhat lacking. Jiang Hai thought for a moment and said to Du Feimin. Originally, he had only planned to raise 25,000 cows this year. Among them, more than 10,000 were cows, and the remaining 15,000 were bulls that he wanted to buy. If these cows were all given to Du Feimin, then how could there be any seeds in Jiang Hai's manor? Most importantly, he had already agreed to give Pra Walton, Qi Li, and Zhang De the same amount as this year, which was 10,000 cows. Of course, he believed that if he said a word, no matter which of the three people, no matter which one, would buy the remaining 5,000 cows. Therefore, he didn't have to worry about selling his cows. Now, even if Du Feimin raised the price by 5%, Jiang Hai was unlikely to sell all the beef to him. If a person only looked at money and didn't care about sincerity, then this person was not far from failure. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.